閣下、前方空域に宇宙機雷群を確認しました。数およそ4000万。
予想通りですね。指向性ゼッフル粒子を。
Well, you know, I would say.
主砲発射。
Hey, how do you know where you're at?
全艦全速敵の背後を襲う。背後に新たな敵艦隊出現。数 およそ3万。
3万隻。
まさか機雷源はどうしたのだ。
突破された模様。
Damn you millennials and your phones.
標準時10月15日23時。勝敗は決した。
You think you're so great because you have boats!
The Laughing Cavalier here, presenting to you another tale of these troubled times. Today, I present to you a review of Ridley Scott's 2023 movie, Napoleon, a film that has rather been the bane of my existence these past few months, haunting my dreams and nightmares. Anyway, this was initially going to be a quick review, but as I got writing, it just kept getting longer and longer, until, finally, I decided to simply make it a full review. Due to copyright concerns, I'll be using as little continuous footage as possible, and will structure the review much like my Tudor rants, which I don't think I need to explain much more. Before we begin though, let us have a quick look at how the film was made, which does partly help explain how this disaster unfolded. Despite being a very old man, who should probably be in a retirement home by now,
I am going to make another movie.
Of course, Mr. Scott. Now let's get you some Ovaltine and off to bed.
Ridley Scott is still making movies. Suffice to say, he's made many a film over the years, but recently his new ones have been rather a mixed bag. Still, in his 80s, he was determined for yet another outing, this time tackling a rather important subject. Apple were rather keen on a sequel to Gladiator of all films.
Joey, you like movies about gladiators?
And apparently Scott agreed to make it if they let him make his passion project in return, a biopic of Napoleon Bonaparte, the famous general and French emperor. It has been claimed Scott wanted to make a pair of movies on his rise and fall respectively, which would make sense, but I have not seen any firm evidence to support this theory. Either way, Scott was given between $130 and $200 million, depending on sources, and given the green light. With a famous director, and one of the most influential people in history as the subject, naturally, you will want an experienced screenwriter at the helm, who knows what he is doing. Or, you can hire David Scarpa, who has previously only written 3 movies and 3 episodes of television. It's alright though, he also did Scott's Gladiator 2, which went well. Okay, so perhaps Scott messed up with the screenwriter he hired. Not to worry though, we still have the cast, and perhaps a good actor suited for the role of the young and energetic artillery officer could captivate, or you could cast a nearly 50-year-old Joaquin Phoenix because he was in Gladiator 1 20 years ago, and you saw him in Joker a few years back as well. Okay, main role not doing well. At least the title will be Kitbag. Ugh.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Oh wait, they changed it to Napoleon. Well, at least one thing went well. Along with Phoenix, it was announced that Jodie Comer, who was about half the age of Phoenix, will be playing his historically older wife, Josephine de Bernay. For a while, that was the only news of casting, although a few roles would trickle out over the following months, most of which we will look at once we get to the review proper. Filming was pushed back due to which led to Jodie Comer dropping out, as Napoleon now clashed with her debut in the West End. In her place, Vanessa Kirby, still far too young compared to Phoenix's Napoleon, took on the role. Filming finally started in late February of 2022 and wrapped in May, meaning that, unusually for a major movie, shooting only lasted for several weeks, compared to the several months you usually see in most other big productions. Apparently, this was partly due to Ridley Scott using multiple cameras, all at once, to get more angles rather than doing different shots and retakes, which I am sure did not impact the quality of the film.
Yes, but we've got to do it from different angles, again and again, and again and again and again.
In July 2023, the first trailer dropped. See my review of it here for more info, and also on the filming, which I included in there as well. Surprisingly, given that this is a historical biopic, the trailer was massively popular, and a wide range of facial expressions of the Wojak variety inhibited the thumbnails of half of the YouTubers in the land. Except me, who remained depressed and cynical. The trailer promised grand battles, cool lines from Napoleon, and an epic experience to end the year. Oh, those poor fools. They did not know what they were in for.
This has been the most terrible year.
However, in the weeks before its release, Mr. Scott managed to rather shoot himself in the foot with his various comments in the press that alienated a lot of potential consumers of his upcoming product, which we will examine in one of the later sections.
How did you know were you there?
I was there, Gandalf.
On the 22nd of November 2023, the film was released theatrically to... well, mixed reviews is pretty accurate. I do not think I've ever seen a film on Rotten Tomatoes reach perfect balance between the critic and user scores.
Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
The mixed and negative reviews were just the tip of the iceberg. The Wojaks disappeared in favour of a huge line of people bashing the movie. The political divide ended, as all sides united in their disdain for the film.
Ridley Scott on historians having criticisms about Napoleon. When I have issues with historians, I ask, "Excuse me, mate, were you there?" No, well, shut the f*** up then. This is a very stupid thing to say.
What? Well, Ridley Scott on historians criticizing Napoleon. Well, I have issues with historians, I ask. "Excuse me, mate, were you there?" No, well, shut the F up then.
That's a great point, Ridley.
Yeah,
that's why we know nothing about history.
Financially, whilst it performed better than expected, earning over $218 million, considering that it cost between $130 and $200 million, not including the marketing budget and the cut the cinemas take, then it can definitely be called a financial flop. Apparently though, for Apple, this was considered a positive, as their hope was that the real profit of the film would come in a wave of new subscribers to their streaming platform, following the release of the theatrical and later extended edition on there. How many did it actually bring? We will probably never know, since those statistics are never usually released. Mr. Scott seemed to be doing alright though, gaining a promotion to a Knight Grand Cross of the Order of the British Empire in the 2023 New Year's Honours list. Technically for his many decades of service, but badly timed given the release of Napoleon just a month or so before. Well, now that little bit of info is out of the way, let us begin this rather exhaustive review of Napoleon.
大丈夫だよ。
お金だって随分使った。大丈夫だって。
Where better to begin than the beginning? The film opens in the midst of the French Revolution, with a quick blurb about its causes, followed by a very brief clip of Marie Antoinette, played by Catherine Walker, being escorted by some Swiss guards, who then hide her in a laundry closet, with her daughter, the Princess Royal, Marie-Thérèse, and her son, the Dauphin Louis. Oh wait, sorry, Marie Antoinette Kid 1 and 2, presumably during the fall of the Tuileries Palace in August of 1792, which then cuts to over a year later, in October of 1793, when Marie Antoinette is executed. And we have Napoleon inaccurately being present here at her death.
You have selected Regicide. If you know the name of the king or queen being murdered, press 1.
I find it odd that we start here with her beheading, when the fall of the Tuileries, and the actual overthrow of the monarchy, would make far more sense to see on screen in more detail, since you would see the massacre of the Swiss guards, more of the brutality of the revolution, and the fact that Napoleon most likely witnessed the event himself. He wrote to his brother about the storming in June, a few months before, when an angry mob broke in and forced the king to wear a red Phrygian cap, a precursor to the more bloody storming 2 months later. In his letter dated 22nd of June 1792, Napoleon said that, "The Jacobins are fools who have no common sense. The day before yesterday, 7 or 8,000 men, armed with pikes, axes, swords, guns, spits, or sharp sticks, went to the assembly with a petition. From there, they went to the king. But it is nonetheless true that it was unconstitutional and a very dangerous example. It is hard to foresee what will become of the kingdom in such stormy circumstances. He doesn't explicitly say if he then witnessed the fall of the palace a few months later, in any of his other letters, but he was in the capital until at least September, and a few days before he wrote of the impending downfall of the king. So this would make far more sense historically, and, given his revulsion for the lack of law and order, would make a great way to start off the film, by establishing that he hates the violence of the mob. Instead, we just get him kind of looking a bit sad, I guess? In fact, he looks like he's trying to remember whether or not he locked the door before he left home that day. Oh yes, and there's a lot of inaccuracies with the execution of Marie Antoinette, but I think I covered that in the trailer video. Now, it is very early in the review, but already I'm going to bring in an example of a Napoleon production that did this right, and that is the 1974 series Napoleon and Love, starring Ian Holm in the main role. Despite being focused on his love life, the series gave us a very good idea of what his character is like. Just in the opening 5 minutes of the first episode, you get scenes like this.
The war will last long enough.
For you?
To prove that a soldier is as good a match as a civil servant. Here, I simply go on being an unemployed general. They've forgotten I exist. This state of affairs
It's dangerous.
is the right one for me. Winning a war means big loot.
And you can win a war for them.
Who won the siege of Toulon?
You did.
Yes. Glory comes from common sense and a mathematical education, which is why I chose to be in the artillery.
For the glory.
For the winning. The Ministry of War, they're out of date. I must find my chance.
Meanwhile, moving forward to 2023, we get a very brief scene of Robespierre, played by Sam Troughton. A little more portly than the quite thin Robespierre, but oh well, justifying the execution of the former queen. Whilst then, we are properly introduced to the character of Napoleon, and also to Paul Barras, played by Tahar Rahim, an important political figure of the era, who would become key in Napoleon's rise. Barras has a special mission for Bonaparte, and for me, this is where the movie started to go wrong. Okay, you could argue that started the moment Scot-Free Productions flashed up a bit earlier, but still. First off, why is Barras even calling Napoleon here? At this point, he was a lowly captain of artillery. Here, it is like Commissioner Gordon has called in Batman to go fight Joker. Secondly, Napoleon should already be at Toulon. To briefly sum up his movements, after September of 1792, he left Paris, and returned to his native Corsica to oversee a battalion of volunteers. In July of 1793, he fled with his family when the island was taken over by nationalists, later pledging their support to the British. And, now back in mainland France, Napoleon ended up with the 4th Regiment of Artillery in Nice. By August, he was escorting powder wagons when, thanks to 2 of his friends, one of whom happened to be Robespierre's younger brother, he was appointed to command the artillery at the siege of Toulon, which we will look at momentarily. Okay, so that seems a little weird, but now we're going to see just how good Joaquin Phoenix can play Napoleon. Remember those scenes of Ian Holm we just saw, where he energetically talks about his goals? Well, let us see how Phoenix does.
It is not necessary to recapture Toulon itself. The town is not a town. The town is a port. Capture the fort that dominates the harbor, and you have the city.
What the hell was that?
Oh, what the hell? Where is his passion? His energetic nature? Where is Napoleon? He sounds bored, and sadly this sets the pattern for the rest of the film.
No! No!
The Toulon stuff in the film is very truncated, and I highly suspect a lot of it was cut out and left for the may or may not be happening extended edition. Right in the first scene, you can vaguely hear Napoleon ask where General Carteau's headquarters is.
General Carteau?
I'm sure this would then have led to a scene where he talks to him about the state of the siege, which is missing from the film. Instead, it is all left up to Napoleon's lethargic narration to tell us how things are going.
Lucien, my dear brother, I am in Toulon already.
Boring.
The troops are in a poor state.
Boring.
Many are conscripts, untrained and undisciplined.
I should mention, it says here it is the 16th of December when he arrives, which, as we went into before, is wrong. The night of the 16th was when Fort Mulgrave fell, implying that Napoleon here won the siege in a day or something. The film suggests that it is basically just the British here garrisoning Toulon, when, in reality, it was a coalition of ardent French royalists, anti-Jacobin federalists, and then troops from Spain, Portugal, and a few of the Italian states. Of course, the British were basically in charge of the defence thanks to their naval presence, but still, it wasn't just one enemy Napoleon faced. Odd. You would have thought mentioning the many nations present here would be a good way to make Napoleon look even better when he defeats all of them later. But then, what do I know? I wasn't there in 1793.
How did you know? Were you there?
Historically, when Napoleon took over the artillery, the siege was not going well. Most of the besieging French troops were a motley collection of regular battalions, militias, and national guards of inferior quality. Granted, the defenders were in even more of a horrendous state, thanks to Whitehall providing no help to Admiral Hood, but still. Napoleon, after being appointed to command the artillery, quickly found his position was more of a paper one, since there was barely any pieces there for him to actually command. Nevertheless, he quickly mustered his forces, determined to expand the artillery arm and win the siege. Energetically, he rounded up every retired veteran he could to man the guns, and requisitioned and found whatever ordnance he could muster. He himself wrote at the time that, "When the representatives of the people appointed me to the army before Toulon and gave me command of the artillery, there were only a few field guns, 2 24-pounders, 2 6-pounders, and 2 mortars, with none of the necessary equipment, with no establishment, no artillery park, no organisation or unity of command. From the general to the last aide-de-camp, everyone directed and changed the disposition of the artillery according to his whim. I set myself to provide the artillery corps with that consideration and independence in its operations, without which it cannot be of useful service. The weakness of the army, our lack of material, the time necessary to prepare a siege train, all made me feel the need to put out of mind the idea of besieging Toulon, and to limit myself to forming a force that would enable us to clear the enemy out of the roads by placing a battery on the Aiguillette. I soon had 14 guns, 4 mortars, and enough equipment to set up several batteries. I established a park and entrusted to NCOs the responsibilities that I could give to non-existent officers. 3 days after my arrival, the army had an artillery arm. The only hint at this in the movie is him digging up some old cannons on the beach and turning some of them into mortars. Other than that, it is merely some more lethargic noises emanating from Joaquin Phoenix.
We are collecting scrap iron to recast small mortars more suitable for my plan.
So I tied an onion to my belt, which was the style at the time.
The most lively thing he does is to cosplay as a rural peasant and ride around observing the British. His disguise, of course, enabling him to seamlessly blend in and not get noticed.
Oi! Right. Yes, you! Move along now!
Ah well, at least they didn't shoot him. Now, you may be asking yourselves, Cavalier, wasn't Toulon one of France's most important naval bases? Surely the French would have had maps they could look at. Or perhaps Napoleon here could use a telescope to observe the British, or send out scouts to look around and report back to him. To which I will point out that you were not there, unlike interdimensional being Ridley Scott, who has witnessed all of human history.
How did you know? Were you there?
But I was always there.
Aside from mustering the artillery, the most important contribution Napoleon made to the siege was the seizure of the British-held Fort Mulgrave Redoubt, dubbed Little Gibraltar. Seizing this enabled Napoleon to then place his artillery directly opposite the ships in the harbour, which would eventually force them to evacuate later on. However, instead of building an earthen redoubt for the scene, like he does for other stuff later in the movie, and God, I can't wait to rant about Waterloo, Scott used Fort Ricasoli in Malta for reasons. The storming of it in the movie barely resembles what happened. Gone is all the intrigue and arguing between Napoleon and the commanders above him before the battle. Gone is the fact that Napoleon commanded the reserves, and, when the attack was faltering, and without orders, he led his men forward, storming the redoubt. He does get wounded at least, but that is about it. He then proceeds to fire on the Allied fleet in the harbour, but it wasn't as sudden and panicky as it was in the movie, nor did he really blow up any British ships. Most of the ones lost were ones from the French fleet already there, and many of them were scuttled by the Allies as they evacuated. This is meant to be the start of Napoleon's career, yet it felt so empty in the movie. Granted, the real-life Napoleon had a habit of exaggerating his deeds for propaganda purposes, but Napoleon had proved himself and started a legend. He apparently later said that, "It was at Toulon that my reputation began." Here, at least I guess he won. Now, I will be fair, this has had a large dose of fiction put into it, but at least it did follow the basic beats of Napoleon arrived to command the artillery, Napoleon leads an assault on a fort, Napoleon fires on the Allied fleet, the French win, and Napoleon becomes a hero, starting his career. It is pretty much the only battle in the movie where Napoleon at least looks like he's vaguely doing something intelligent. Things go further downhill from there, though, when we speedrun the downfall of Robespierre. Honestly, if he's going to be reduced to a cartoonish cameo, You might have just not mentioned him at all and have it happen off screen. Of course, there is no mention of Napoleon's own involvement with Robespierre's brother, which put him under suspicion and briefly arrest, but that is not important right now. We have to introduce the main character of the film, Josephine de Bernay, played by Vanessa Kirby.
It begins!
As is well noted, she actually wasn't called Josephine, her birth name being Marie-Joseph Rose Tacher de la Pagerie, then becoming a de Bernay when she married her first husband. She went by her middle name of Rose for most of her life up until she met Napoleon, who then created the Josephine nickname for her, which has stuck ever since. Her first husband was guillotined in the Reign of Terror, and Josephine herself was arrested, being on the verge of meeting his fate. Thankfully, Robespierre's downfall saved her, as we see in the film, and she was released. I should briefly mention her two children, Eugene and Hortense de Bernay, mainly the latter, since the movie fails to really address them much. Hortense was Josephine's daughter, and, to be honest, I completely forgot she was even in the movie. You get a brief shot of her standing on the stairs here when she's a child, then a bit later she has grown up and is in a few dimly lit scenes, before her only talking scene after Josephine has died. Of course, we get no mention that she ended up in an unhappy marriage to Napoleon's brother Louis, nor do her and her brother, despite Napoleon basically treating them like his own children, and both of them being quite loyal to him, well, depending on the situation, getting basically any screen time. It is a shame, since there was actually one somewhat humorous scene that perhaps should have been included, and it is thanks to Hortense that we know of it. She later wrote the following of an incident that happened when she was about 12. Barrat's guest list proved to be very numerous. The only people I knew were Tallien and his wife. At table, I found myself placed between my mother and a general who, in order to talk to her, thrust himself across me with such force and persistence that I grew tired of him and pushed my chair back. Despite myself, however, I could not but notice that he had a good figure and an expressive face, albeit one of a remarkable pallor. He talked with great spirit and appeared to be interested in nothing but my mother. The general turned out to be Bonaparte. Now, you're probably asking yourself, Cavalier, why didn't Ridley Scott include a scene like this in the movie when he focuses most of the film on Josephine and Napoleon's love story? It seems perfect for it. Well, I think I have an answer to that.
How did you know? Were you there?
At least we did get one of the few accurate scenes in the film where a young Eugene I, asks for his father's sword. This was, according to Louis-Antoine Favaleux de Bourrienne in his Memoirs of Napoleon, how the general became acquainted with Josephine in the first place. While commandant of Paris, it is stated that Eugene Bernay, a boy of 10 or 12 years of age, son of Viscount Bernay, who had been a general officer in the Republican armies, but put to death by Robespierre, presented himself to the general and requested to have his father's sword restored to him. Bonaparte caused the request to be complied with, and the tears of the boy, as he received and kissed the relic, excited his attention. He treated the boy so kindly that next day his mother, Josephine de Bernay, came to thank him, and her beauty and singular gracefulness of address made a strong impression upon him. The acquaintance thus commenced speedily, led to their marriage. However, this incident occurred after the attempted royalist coup, which we will look at soon. Why this was done is odd, since you would thought if you had done it accurately, and had the scene be the perfect introduction as to how Napoleon and Josephine met, that would make more sense. Although it should be noted Bourrienne's account was written years later, and he did have a habit of embellishing certain facts, shall we say. Instead, the movie has them meeting each other at a party. Now, Napoleon and Love also did this. The reason they give is that Napoleon is seeing Barrat, who, currently having Josephine as mistress himself, which the movie doesn't mention by the way, wants to effectively give her over to Napoleon.
I want you to be nice to him.
Am I not always nice?
Be as charming as only you can be. Rose, I assume the house is not in fact finished. There are bills still unpaid.
Well, yes, of course.
Deserve well of me by charming my collaborator. The man who made me one of the directors. The man whom I have made Commander-in-Chief of the Army of the Interior. Is that news? Is he less pale-faced?
Much less pale-faced.
Compliment him on his triumphs.
Do I know them?
Remember the phrases, brilliant handling of the artillery, put down the rebellion, save the republic. My dear General.
My dear Barrat.
But I decided I wanted to bring you together with one of your greatest admirers. Rose, you met General Bonaparte once. In this very room, as I remember. Rose, General, would you excuse me for a moment? I must divest myself of this absurdity.
Didn't he tell you that I came here specially early in the hope of a moment alone with you?
No.
I wanted to tell you myself.
I'm flattered.
I wanted to say to you what I've been saying to everyone else. How marvelous it was, the way you saved the Republic.
Ah.
By putting down the rebellion.
I did what had to be done.
What I admired so much was your Brilliant handling of the artillery.
I simply put my guns in the right places.
Who else would have put them in the right places?
No one. At least no one in the French army.
No one.
After that, it was merely a question of... Forgive me, these are not things to be discussed with a woman.
Blasted female! No, please go on. I'm fascinated.
The convention wanted me to put down the rebellion without killing anyone. To them, the French people was the sacred ark of the covenant. Firing on the French people would be a violation of all the principles of the revolution. They failed to understand that rebellion is war.
You put things so clearly.
Thank you.
Because you understand them so clearly.
In the movie, though, the conversation between the two is incredibly stilted.
Why are you staring at me?
Am I?
Yes?
I was not.
Oh, you weren't.
I was. I was staring at your face.
You get to look at women.
What is this costume you have on?
This is my uniform. I led the French victory at Toulon. Do not tell me your name.
We then get a load of scenes of their courtship that, honestly, I can't be bothered to even get into. I'm sorry if that sounds lazy, but it is so tiring and takes up too much of the movie. I'm sorry if you enjoyed the sits vaguely smiling and giggling at one another at a cafe scene, or the thrilling sitting in a bare room where Josephine opens up her legs whilst Napoleon looks bored scene, but there's not much more I can say other than they're terrible scenes. I mean, to her credit, Vanessa Kirby really tried. She really did. In fact, the bit where she talks about the revolution and how it affected her was coming close to decent dialogue. But this is like the chief engineer of the Hindenburg trying to pump more hydrogen into the cells to keep it airborne. Granted, Josephine and Napoleon's relationship was a weird one. Take, for example, the love letters.
April 1796. I have your letters of the 16th and 21st. There are many days when you don't write. What do you do, then? No, my darling, I am not jealous, but sometimes worried. Come soon. You are new, if you delay, you will find me ill. Fatigue and your absence are too much. Your letters are the joy of my days, and my days of happiness are not many. Juno is bringing 22 flags to Paris. You must come back with him, you understand? Hopeless sorrow, inconsolable misery, sadness without end, if I am so unhappy to see him return alone. Adorable friend, he will see you, he will breathe in your temple. Perhaps you will even grant him the unique and perfect favor of kissing your cheek, and I shall be alone and far, far away. But you are coming, aren't you? You are going to be here beside me, in my arm, on my breast, on my mouth. Take wing and come. A kiss on your heart, and one much lower down, much lower. B.
This is disgusting.
Thankfully, the plot moves forward a bit to the attempted coup of the 13th of Vendémiaire. Long story short, after the fall of Robespierre, the National Convention, effectively the French Parliament, was incredibly weak, and some Parisians sympathetic to the royalist cause now wanted a return of the monarchy. On the 5th of October, 1795, or the 13th of Vendémiaire, year 4 of the revolutionary calendar, as many as 30,000 marched through Paris in an attempt to overthrow the government. Napoleon was in the capital at the time, now a general, but without an army, having been overlooked for command due to his previous links to Robespierre. However, the coup would give him another chance. Paul Barras was put in charge of the defence, and Napoleon became his second in command. The next day, Napoleon wrote to his brother about what happened. The royalists, organised in the sections, were daily getting bolder. The convention ordered the Le Pelleriere section to be disarmed, but it drove the troops back. Manos, who was in command, is thought to have been a traitor, and he was dismissed at once. The convention appointed Barras to command the troops, and the committees nominated me as second in command. The enemies attacked us at the Tuileries. We killed a good many of them. They killed 30 of our men and wounded 60. We have disarmed the sections, and all is quiet. As usual, I was not wounded. In his official report, Napoleon also stated it was Barras who was doing the commanding, and that he was merely his deputy. But over the years, it was turned into Napoleon being the one who was more decisive in taking action during the coup, most famously ordering Murat, his future brother-in-law, to ride to St. Cloud to get the artillery. True or not, we do at least get some of this in the movie, although, again, it is very rushed, with this event suddenly being sprung upon us. Also, it's portrayed as though it is like a demonstration, with, at most, the deadliest weapons in the royalist arsenal being pitchforks, whereas, in reality, some National Guardsmen had joined the mob, and after the incident at the Tuileries shown in the film, they were still fighting in other parts of the city. Well, no time to take in what we have seen. Napoleon's getting married. Ah well, at least after this, and some more cringy love scenes, shall we say, we will get to the first Italian campaign, when the Folie...
Dear Josephine, as I have been sent to liberate Egypt, I have already conquered Italy, who surrendered without conflict.
Oh, wait, no, we don't. Okay, we're just skipping over the campaign that saw him lead a demoralised and outnumbered army to numerous victories across northern Italy, and forced the Austrians to sign a peace treaty with the French. Along the way, he achieved glory for himself, most notably at Arcole, depicted here in this famous painting of him leading the charge across the bridge there personally. Ah yes, that is definitely a conquest without conflict. Ah well, at least we've got more awkward love scenes with Josephine instead. The next military engagement in the movie is the Egyptian campaign. The only battle that we see is the Battle of the Pyramids. Famously fought several miles from the pyramids, it pitted about 20,000 French troops on one side against a larger force of Mamluks, the feared horsemen who ruled Egypt. Napoleon elected to form his men into square formation, to resist the Mamluk cavalry. Before the battle, he is alleged to have given this speech to his men. Soldiers, you came to this country to save the inhabitants from barbarism, to bring civilization to the Orient, and subtract this beautiful part of the world from the domination of England. From the top of those pyramids, 40 centuries are contemplating you. The Mamluks charged, but could not break the French squares. In what was probably the most lopsided victory in Napoleon's career, he lost 29 dead and 230 wounded, compared to as many as 10,000 Mamluk casualties. Now, how does time traveller Ridley Scott portray the battle? Well, Napoleon gets a couple of cannons to fire on the pyramids. How the hell they're hitting them is beyond me.
Where you putting the artillery? There.
It is very effective, apparently causing the Mamluk commander to fall off his horse and everyone to just surrender. What the hell? You had all these extras dressed up for this one scene. They don't appear again, and that's it? No fighting? Not even 30 seconds of the cavalry charging all men in squares? Oh, that's right. Ridley Scott, in an interview for The Times, said that, I don't know if he did that, but it was a fast way of saying he took Egypt. Of course, he could have asked a historian about that, but he was allergic to books.
How did you know? Were you there?
It seems so disrespectful as well. Napoleon was fascinated by the great civilizations of old. You can see it in his speech where he told the men 40 centuries are contemplating you. To order your troops to attack the very symbol you respect is a stupid decision. Did Ridley Scott have a bad holiday in Cairo once or something? This is further exemplified by the next scene, where we actually do see the archaeological work the French did. This particular part is based on a late 19th century painting by Maurice Orange, where Napoleon is shown the mummy of an ancient pharaoh. This could be a great way to show Napoleon's fascination with the legends of old, and how it compares to his own that he is creating. There is so much potential to be had here. Everything is set up perfectly. And, to its credit, the movie does start to do this, with him looking intently at the mummy. So, what happens next? And then he just steps down, looks towards Juno to do something, I guess, then stands there waddling for a few seconds like he needs his diaper changed.
We did 20 takes, and that was the best one.
I mean, it could be worse. The mummy could have bit his hand, causing him to fall down the stairs into a toilet, which then gets stuck onto his head. I'm sure we will get that in the extended edition. And then, aside from scenes of him sitting in his tent and learning that his wife is cheating on him, that is pretty much it for the Egyptian campaign. Gone is his conquest of the region, no mention of his march into Syria, and the controversial massacre of Ottoman prisoners. Not a word of his defeat at the Siege of Acre, which forced him to retreat back to Egypt. All gone. Instead, it is just 2 scenes of him in his tent talking to Juno, where he suddenly decides to abandon his army and return to France, the movie implying that it is entirely because of Josephine's affairs. In reality, whilst he did learn about this in Egypt, it was the deteriorating political situation in France that was the bigger draw. The Directory, the body now ruling France, had basically squandered the successes Napoleon had won for them in Italy, and was now facing trouble. Here, finally, was an opportunity for the Corsican general. In a scene after he gets back, we get some bits of him saying that, But the movie firmly implies that Josephine is the cause, not least when Napoleon says,
Added to which the discovery that my wife is a...
Of course, before that scene, we have to sit through a lengthy segment of Napoleon returning home, chucking Josephine's stuff out, making her cry, saying he's divorcing her, and then, by the evening he has calmed down and suddenly gets browbeaten by Josephine into staying married, with her saying that rather infamous line from the trailer.
You are nothing without me. Say it. You are just a brute that is nothing without me.
How Josephine helped Napoleon take Toulon, crush the Royalists, defeat the Austrians and conquer Egypt is beyond me. In fact, it should be the other way around. Josephine is nothing without him. Maybe in the early part of their marriage, when he was a young penniless general, and marrying her gave him some prestige, you could say that, but it's one of the most baffling lines of the whole movie. Oh, and she also says he's nothing without his mother as well, who has been completely absent and not even mentioned. All this does is to make Napoleon look like a child. I mean, yes, he did stay with Josephine, and the historical relationship was one of the most bizarre in human history, but I must tap the sign and say, watch the Ian Holm version again.
I shall divorce her immediately.
May I ask why?
Because she's a...
But is that a political reason? We are planning a coup d'etat. I ask, would a divorce help us or not?
Whether it helps or not.
Is this the moment to proclaim to the people of France you've been a cuckold?
I shall get rid of her.
I agree with Joseph. I agree with you. Not because of her adulteries, but because she commits them so publicly. Who knows of her indiscretions? Our circle, a few hundred people, no more. To the rest of Paris, the rest of France, you are a popular hero with a charming helpmeet. I urge you to preserve their illusions for the moment. When you are in power, you can do as you please. But you are not yet a ruler.
I shall never speak to her again.
So long as you're sure of yourself.
If I were not sure of myself, I would tear my heart out and throw it on the fire! The question is decided.
Few moments later.
I loved you more than any woman has ever been loved.
Yes.
I have no love left in me. I cannot love you or anyone ever again.
Because of what I've done.
That is what you've done.
So I find what I want most in the world. As I lose it, your love.
You found other men's love.
It wouldn't have happened if you'd been there. I'm weak. I needed your strength, but you weren't there. You're too kind. You should hit me. Nice idea, Party! You should kill me. I'll go to my maison, and you'll never see me again. But because you loved me, do one thing for me before I go. Because I love you. Kiss me. Kiss me goodbye.
Your behavior is unconscionable.
See? We are given a clear reason as to why he wants to stay with her. Why didn't Ridley Scott do this?
How did you know we...
Will you please shut the up?
Now the coup of the 18th of Brumaire. Historically, this coup originated with Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès, one of the 5 members of the Directory. Sieyès decided to use Napoleon as a way of getting rid of the other directors and taking over. In reality, a coup within the coup would happen thanks to Napoleon's brother Lucien, who happened to be the president of the Council of the 500, the lower chamber of the French legislature. On the 18th of Brumaire, year 8 of the revolutionary calendar, or 9th of November 1799, Lucien convinced the 500 that the Jacobin coup was at hand, and so they were removed to the Château de Saint-Cloud. Meanwhile, Sieyès and Ducos resigned, whilst Barras was pressured into it, as is shown in the film, which effectively ended the Directory. The next day, Napoleon marched into the Council of the Ancients, the upper chamber, and then the 500. But by this point, they had realised that there was no Jacobin coup, and that it was in fact one being launched by Bonaparte. He was assaulted and had to be helped out by some of his grenadiers. Lucien would save the day by telling the guards that some of the deputies were terrorising the members with daggers, pointing to his injured brother as proof, and swore to them that, if he actually were a traitor, he would kill him himself. The guards thus marched in and dispersed the deputies, ending the Directory, and soon Napoleon was established as first consul of the Republic, soon to be its undisputed leader. Now, compared to some other events, this one does go somewhat historically. It is really though just in the execution where it falls down. we get some laughable scenes where the directors are forced out that feel like they're from a sitcom.
It's a simple letter of resignation. We would like to...
not signing anything!
We have a letter of resignation for you to sign.
Well, I am eating my breakfast. I am enjoying a succulent breakfast.
This is Democracy Manifest.
Then, when Napoleon is being assaulted by the 500, he runs off and flops down the stairs at one point, as though he were in a Looney Tunes sketch. I don't get this. You nearly had it, movie. But when we were getting a serious moment, you know, Napoleon taking over France, you turn it into this disjointed mess. Anyway, Napoleon is now first consul. He goes around with Josephine, who is now the effective first lady. They have a few dinners. There's a rather infamous part we'll get to later.
Both!
Talleyrand urges Napoleon to become king, which he refuses.
What? King?
Another scene, and then... Oh wait, no time to look at anything else. He's suddenly being crowned emperor. Do you see one of the main problems with this film? Scott, as I feared back when this was announced, decided to cram everything into this movie, which led to the plot whizzing along without any of the events connecting to one another. In one scene, he's laughing at the idea of becoming king, yet minutes later, he's being crowned emperor instead. What caused this change? Who knows? I wasn't... oh, never mind. Napoleon and Love cover this perfectly, with Napoleon clarifying why he chose emperor rather than king.
Emperor? Ah. Like the rulers of Rome, like Augustus.
You know my preference. The French are accustomed to a king.
France is a republic, as Rome was. Rome became an empire.
You don't find emperor too grandiose?
The French like grandiosity, and I am not the 19th Bourbon. I'm the first Napoleon.
The coronation does roughly follow the abridged version of what happened, including Napoleon crowning himself, and it does very closely match the painting done by Jacques-Louis David, who is actually here sketching it, and then a little scene later when he's painting some more on Napoleon, which is a nice touch. Again though, the scene is really let down by Phoenix's gruff voice croaking his lines.
I did not usurp the crown. I found it in the gutter. I picked it up with my sword. And it was the people, Alexis. The people who put it on my head.
If I take the crown, if I take it, do you know how it will have happened? I saw the crown of France lying on the ground and I picked it up with the point of my sword.
I found the crown of France in the gutter. I picked it up with the tip of my sword.
Then there are a couple of scenes related to the ongoing drama of will he won't he divorce Josephine. Again, I will skip these a bit, particularly since we get a terrible exchange that I'll go into in the next section.
Lamb chop.
And now, we jump ahead a bit to December 1805, to see the second longest battle sequence in the film, Austerlitz. Again, I went into a bit in the trailer breakdown, so forgive me for repeating myself. I will try to be as concise as I can. Historically, Austerlitz was one of the most important battles of the whole war, and was arguably the greatest of Napoleon's victories. By 1805, a third coalition had been arrayed against France. The now Emperor Napoleon had long been planning to knock out his greatest threat, Britain, through a seaborne, and apparently even airborne, invasion. But thanks to a certain local Norfolk man, Napoleon's hopes of landing an army across the Channel were dashed. Well before this event though, the Grande Armée had abandoned the Channel coast, and had rapidly marched across Europe to deal with the upcoming Austro-Russian threat, who had now joined the war against France. Thanks to a bit of a problem with the timings though, the two armies had not united. At Ulm, Marshal Mack's Austrian army was captured, and within weeks Napoleon was in Vienna. By December, the French army was near Austerlitz, modern-day Slavkov-Ubulina, but by now the remnants of the Austrian army, under their emperor Francis II, had united with the Russian army, led in person by Tsar Alexander I, who collectively outnumbered the French forces. Not only that, the Grande Armée was at its limits of its supplies, and stuck in enemy territory in the middle of winter. A bit of foreshadowing for 1812 right there. Napoleon, however, had a plan. Now, everything I have just mentioned in about 1 or 2 minutes is not brought up at all in the film. We jump straight to the day before, with Napoleon scouting around on his own again, like at Toulon. Except now he's an emperor with a huge army, including dedicated scouts who could do this job. But it was vitally important we get a bunch of heavily green screen shots of him in this movie that didn't use much CGI apparently.
Why you always lying?
We get to meet Tsar Alexander I, played by Edouard Philipponnat, who, to his credit, is about the right age for Alexander, and I do think captures the Tsar's youth and inexperience quite well. Opposite him is the Emperor Francis of Austria, played by Miles Juppe, who looks nothing like Francis and is a rather poor choice for the role. We get some more love letters to Josephine when Napoleon tells us,
"My previous ally has now joined with my enemy."
This is utter rubbish. France has not been in alliance with either Russia or Austria at this point. It would not be until Tilsit that we'd even meet the Tsar, let alone ally him, and Austria even later than that. He also continues and says,
"The Russian Tsar Alexander joined forces with the Prince of Austria."
Again, Francis is an emperor, not a prince. You literally tell us he's an emperor in the movie. How was this simple mistake not caught? I've made mistakes like that before, but I'm one guy writing and editing. You had over $100 million. Anyway, on to the fighting. The historical battle went roughly as follows. Napoleon had somewhere between 65 and 75,000 men against 73 to 89,000 Austrian and Russian troops. Despite being outnumbered and in enemy territory, Napoleon decided to split his forces, with one corps under Marshal Deux being initially kept further to the south, making his forces seem even weaker. He also left the Pratzen Heights in the centre open for the Allies to occupy, seemingly a blunder, since all the rules of war dictate that occupying a major piece of high ground like that would be pivotal. He also sent overtures to the Allies, again making it look as though he was weak. All of this combined made the Allies feel confident that they could attack, which is exactly what Napoleon wanted. His right flank, around the village of Telnitz, was seemingly weak, and, hoping to cut his lines of communication off from Vienna, the Allies massed their attacks there. There was bitter fighting, and the village changed hands more than once, but Devoe's corps, having marched like hell, soon arrived to reinforce and hold the flank. Napoleon had now forced the Allies to weaken their centre on the Pratzen Heights to reinforce their attack, and now he decided to go on the offensive himself. He ordered his troops, including the Imperial Guard, to attack the heights, apparently saying, "One sharp blow and the war is over." After much bitter fighting, the French broke through the troops on the heights and broke the Allied army. Towards the end, some of the Russian troops tried to flee across the frozen ponds, but French artillery opened up and drowned many, or so Napoleon claimed in his official dispatch.
You would not deny the artist a certain license.
However, the Baron de Cameau, who was on Napoleon's staff, disagreed. The bulletin says that this pond absorbed thousands of them. I was near enough to see what occurred there. The Russian army skirted the pond and put it between them and the cavalry that would have harassed them. While some parties might have gotten their feet wet, they did not drown. The few corpses of the men and horses that I saw there had been killed by gunfire. They were on the bank, and even nearer. I would say, in fact, that it was not 2,000 men who perished, but fewer than 200, while, without this obstacle, the column would have perished. De Cameau was seemingly backed up by the physical evidence when, a few years later, the ponds were drained, and only a few dead horses and cannon could be found in them. Nevertheless, at the end of the day, nearly 1,300 French troops were killed, with 7,000 wounded. Meanwhile, the Allies had suffered about 16,000 killed and wounded, and 20,000 captured, with a further loss of 186 cannon, 400 ammunition wagons, and 45 standards, a huge chunk of their army. After the battle, Napoleon wrote the following day to his troops with this proclamation. "Soldiers, I am satisfied with you. You have, in the engagement of Austerlitz, justified what I expected from your intrepidity. You have decorated your eagles with immortal glory. An army of 100,000 men, commanded by the emperors of Russia and Austria, have been in less than 4 hours cut to pieces and dispersed. Those who have escaped our swords have been drowned in the lakes. Soldiers, when everything necessary to ensure the happiness and prosperity of our country shall be accomplished, I will conduct you back to France. There you shall be the object of my most tender solicitude. My people will again behold you with joy, and it will be sufficient for you to say, 'I was at the Battle of Austerlitz,' for them to answer, 'That is a brave man.'" Now, there are some complicated parts there, but written the right way, you can at least get the gist of Napoleon tricks the Allies into attacking him, Napoleon reinforces his flank and forces the enemy to weaken their centre. Napoleon breaks their centre and wins a huge victory. Now, what does Ridley Scott do? Well, let us look at this cavalcade of nonsense. So Napoleon, instead of leaving the Pratzen Heights open to the Allies and daring them to attack his weakened right flank, he has now occupied some sort of village, probably Telnitz, but the name is never mentioned, with what appears to be a few thousand troops. The Allied army, which appears to be no more than about 10,000 if I'm being generous, march across what appears to be an open plain. Wait boy, wait. Quick side note, where the hell is the Austrian and Russian artillery? Did they bring any? Napoleon, unfortunately, is suffering from the early onset of dementia, since he tells his men to wait and...
Let them think they have the higher ground.
They are on flat ground, Napoleon. Why would they think they are higher up, you utter clown?
These are small, but the ones out there are far away.
The Allies, though, thinking they have found the precious high ground, I suppose, rush towards the French in the traditional YOLO fashion, pioneered by Count Leroy Jenkins in his Art of War. Once they are all fighting in the village, Dementia Napoleon gives another order, this time to his reserve infantry on this ridge here, to take their positions on the higher ground.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
At which they charge. Downhill. Again, you are on the high ground, now you are moving to lower ground. Why did you even add the line about taking the high ground then?
Small, far away.
Also, how the hell did the Allies not notice Napoleon standing here with a bunch of his guards? The film makes out that he has cleverly hidden his men underneath a bunch of sheets, but you can clearly see them here in these sodding trenches. In fact, they were digging them all yesterday. Your scouts must have noticed something. Then Napoleon shouts out,
Cavalry from the west! Pierce their flank!
Amazing how these men can perfectly hear and execute his orders at a moment's notice, even though they are a fair distance away from him. His croaky, wheezing voice is just that powerful. The cavalry, having also studied Count Jenkins' tactics, charge in, and the Allied army starts to break. However, as Prince Akbar of the Tsar's Imperial Guard tells the men, and Napoleon reveals that he was hiding his artillery under the sheet all along. Having driven most of the Allied army onto a frozen lake, he opens fire, and Ridley Scott creates some trailer shots for the critics to lap up in their reviews. Again, all the reports suggest this incident did not happen, or was heavily exaggerated. Yet Scott just did it anyway. If he wanted to, you could use this dispute over the break the ice controversy to look more at Napoleon's character, and how he reported his victories. Maybe having a scene of him writing up the dispatch, claiming this huge number of people drowned, and then perhaps have one of his marshals confront him over it. The closest I think any series has come to this is, yet again, Napoleon and Love, where, after the Battle of Eylau, he's confronted by Marshal Lannes.
Sir, may I speak with you?
No, no.
Sir, I'm a Marshal of France.
My Chief of Staff.
I could obtain no satisfaction from your Chief of Staff, sire.
Well, Marshal Lannes, speak.
I've read your bulletin on the Battle of Eylau, sir.
Good, so have I.
It does an injustice to Marshal Augereau and myself.
When you are Commander-in-Chief, you can write your own bulletins and do justice to whom you please.
Why do you write a bulletin that is a pack of lies?
That's lies, propaganda!
Augereau and I have been fighting there all day!
The cavalry charge gave us victory. Prince Murat is a brave man.
Oh, what Frenchman is not brave?
Some less than him.
Me?
No.
There are 20,000 brave Frenchmen lying out there dead in the snow. My men and Augereau's. They're the ones that gave you victory. They're lying there with 25,000 Russians equally dead. And the only name that you name is Murat. That circus rider with his pantomime clothes. Why? Because he's a brother-in-law. Because he's one of the family. What are you warming up for him, the throne of Poland?
Marshal Lannes is not well. Shall I have him taken to his quarters?
No. I distribute glory as it suits me! All glory, all success come from me!
Because you march through blood, you think yourself a great man. The blood of one Frenchman is worth more than the whole of Poland!
Marshal Lannes, if you're not satisfied, you can go back to France.
No. You need me.
Of course, this confrontation is completely fictitious, since Lannes was a friend of Napoleon and wasn't even at Eylau, being back in Warsaw, but something like this could work. A shame that series did not really cover Austerlitz. However, there is another that did. I'm going to bring in the 2002 Napoleon series starring Christian Clavier in the main role. I must admit, I have not seen the whole series. I tried to start watching episode 1, but was put off by the terrible English version with its awful voices that feel so out of place. and thus I skipped ahead and only watched the bit in episode 2 dealing with Austerlitz. I suspect the original French would probably have sounded better, so perhaps someday I will track that down. Of course, in spite of the budget, it was not enough to show everything, and the uniforms in particular were very cheap looking. However, we got some good bits to show us just how Ridley Scott could have done this. I will try and play as much of the clip as I can, but please forgive the jump cuts due to having to sneak it past copyright.
I want to force the Austrians and the Russians to fight where I decide.
Sir, all the military handbooks agree that the most favorable position for a battle is on high ground.
High ground! The authors of those handbooks are not where we are today. Well, gentlemen, Austerlitz will prove Colinco's beloved handbooks wrong. We will give the high ground to our opponents this time.
So they can swoop down on us?
No, so they think they can swoop down on us. The road to Vienna, my friends. So let's try to think from the enemy's point of view. What will he concentrate his forces on above all?
Taking back the road and cutting off our line of communication.
We are going to pretend we are abandoning the road. We will turn back and retreat.
Thus encouraging the enemy to advance.
We will have to withdraw some of his troops from the plateau of Pratzen. When we feel that our opponents are confident, we will stop retreating. Bernadotte and Soult will attack the plateau of Pratzen.
It sounds so simple.
It is simple. That's why they won't see it coming.
Quite simple. We have a map, he tells us the situation, we can see the genius of his plan, and thus we know this character has a good grasp of strategy. Why the hell did Ridley Scott give us this muddled mess then? I think the people who praised these scenes were completely fooled by the slow-mo shot of the people drowning and the artillery raining down, since it is the second worst battle sequence behind Waterloo. And I cannot wait to rant about that. The tactics are completely childish and non-existent. He just yells out random orders about taking the high ground, whereas his army is on flat terrain. I swear the planning for this version of the battle was done in Napoleon Total War or something. As we have seen, he could have at least vaguely followed the history, but he did not, since, honestly, I don't think he knows it. He vaguely heard something about there was some high ground, a village, and a lake, and just imagined a sequence from it in his dreams. It would be like if the Women's Institute invited me to give a lecture on home economics, and I taught everyone how to make a round of toast, then claimed that this was the greatest pinnacle of my career. Well, after the battle, Emperor Francis I of Austria, second of the Holy Roman Empire, although that is about to change soon, goes to surrender to Napoleon. He has a bit of a chat with him. Francis says the Tsar is in a rage and won't make peace. Napoleon says something about how he could have captured the whole Allied army, but he allowed some of them to escape as a kind gesture to Francis. Yeah, his face is the one I would have made as well. And then they drink a toast to peace between France and Austria. And it's back to Napoleon and Josephine. Oh. By the way, we are just over halfway into the movie, including the credits, so buckle in for the second half.
Oh, very well. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Get ourselves some snacks.
We now return to the main problem of the film, the focus on Napoleon and Josephine. Hey, remember that whole campaign in 1806 where Napoleon smashed the Prussian army? Nah, we can't have that. We need a scene of him and Josephine at a ball. Want to see the Battle of Eylau, fought in the snow, that led to a bloodbath between the French and Russian armies? Nope. You need the scene of a dog barking at Napoleon while Josephine laughs. Want to see the Battle of Friedland, where Napoleon defeated the Russian army and forced the Tsar to make peace? Nope. You need a scene of Napoleon and Josephine in a bathtub. Finally, Napoleon's mother, who has barely been in the movie till now, despite Josephine earlier saying that Napoleon was nothing without his mother, speaks to the Emperor. She wants to make sure Napoleon is capable of bearing a son, so she shanghais Eleanor de Noailles, and lo and behold she gets pregnant. Yet again, Ridley Scott weakens Napoleon the man, who now needs his mummy to make all the decisions for him. Yes, historically, he did have an affair with Eleanor, and in December 1806 she gave birth to a son, but Napoleon's sister Caroline was the one who had suggested de Noailles to her brother, and he grew suspicious that Murat, Caroline's husband, played in Napoleon and Love by
the actor Peter Bowles,
was the actual father, and thus he could not be certain. Of course, neither Caroline nor Murat exist in this version. We needed more scenes of Josephine to replace them. It was not just the other Bonapartes, but Napoleon himself as well, who was worried about whether he was capable of having a son, and thus he took mistresses. The most famous of these is someone I should briefly mention, a very important woman in Napoleon's life who goes completely unmentioned in this movie, Marie Walewska. In 1806, following a successful campaign against the Prussians, Napoleon marched into Warsaw, and the Poles, whose country had been occupied since the partitions of the late 18th century, hailed him as a liberator. Immediately, though, Napoleon's eyes turned to a Polish noblewoman, Marie Walewska, the wife of Athanasius Count Colonna Walewska. Marie was already a mother, and Napoleon became obsessed with her. She was initially highly reluctant to have anything to do with him, being more concerned about the fate of her country, and whether Poland would be restored to its full independence. And it was this love of her country that was used to get her to see Napoleon. Eventually, she would submit to him, and it was his relationship with Marie that would undo the marriage to Josephine. They became lovers, and then, in 1809, Marie told Napoleon that she was pregnant with his child, and the following year she would give birth to a son, meaning that, without a doubt, Napoleon could bear children, and that Josephine was no longer capable of doing so. It was this that convinced him to finally end his marriage to her and seek a new wife. Shame we didn't get that in this movie. Finally, Napoleon is going to divorce Josephine. Historically, this was a quite dramatic moment in both of their lives, as one would expect. Previous portrayals of this scene have treated it with reverence and sadness. Again, Napoleon and Love springs to mind. Here, though, well...
Go. This is for your country. That's what this is, right?
Why? Why can't you just be serious for one moment in this pathetic movie you created, Ridley? I mean, the soundtrack to the scene and everything leading up to the slap suggested it is serious, but then that happens. Anyway, Josephine is packed off to Malmaison, although she ain't out of the picture quite yet.
I'll be back.
Now, is there anything else I'm forgetting in this period? There is something I'm forgetting. Oh, I feel like I've heard of it. Oh yes, the Peninsular War, the conflict that led to the downfall of Napoleon's empire. Long story short, since 1795, the Kingdom of Spain had been in alliance with France, most notably fighting together with the French at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, which didn't go too well. Spain, though, was in a dysfunctional state, not helped by squabbles between King Charles IV and Crown Prince Ferdinand, that eventually led to a coup in 1808 by the latter, who proclaimed himself as King Ferdinand VII. The previous year, the French and Spanish had jointly invaded Portugal and occupied much of the country. Napoleon, with his troops already spread out across the peninsula, and after a direct appeal by Charles, decided to intervene. Instead of restoring Charles or backing Ferdinand, thinking he could impose on Spain the Napoleonic ideals he had brought to the Italian and German states, he removed both, imprisoning them in France and replacing the Bourbon dynasty of Spain with a Napoleonic one led by his older brother Joseph, whom he had previously made King of Naples, which now went to Marshal Murat. This arrogance on Napoleon's part was to prove a major factor in his eventual downfall. Instead of accepting their new Napoleonic system, the Spanish people, devoted to God and their king, rose up in open revolt, and in July of 1808 they defeated a French army under General Dupont at Balian, capturing around 17,000 French troops, the first time a Napoleonic army had suffered such a major setback. Before, Napoleon had an ally that, whilst weakened and fractured, was an ally nevertheless. Now, he had a firm enemy on his doorstep that would fight him all the way. Added to this, Britain, already supporting the Portuguese, now sent troops to aid the Spanish junta in Cadiz, that was acting on behalf of the imprisoned Ferdinand VII. This war would last until 1814, and, at its height, more than 250,000 French troops would be stuck occupying the peninsula, having to fend off attacks by Spanish guerrillas in the hills and mountains. Meanwhile, a predominantly Anglo-Portuguese army with some Spanish units, led by the soon-to-be Duke of Wellington, would prove to be a major thorn in the side of Napoleon's marshals, inflicting a number of defeats on them over the years. This conflict drained France of much wealth and manpower, even before the disastrous invasion of Russia. Meanwhile, the conflict became something of a war of liberation for the Spanish people, a major part in their history, and also in Britain, where Wellington won fame and glory. The occupation also led to the weakening of the Spanish and Portuguese governments in their American empires, leading to the independence of various states in Central and Southern America. Does this conflict get a mention? Nope. This would be like doing a film about the Russian Revolution without mentioning the Tsar and his family, or the English Civil War without bringing up King Charles I. Hell, the Powerpuff Girls of all things did a better job bringing up the Peninsular War than Ridley Scott did.
Your story's all wrong! Napoleon's 1807 seizure of Portugal and the subsequent rebellion by the Spaniards cost France over 300,000 casualties, untold sums of money, and contributed to the eventual weakening of the Napoleonic Empire.
Anyway, back to the movie. Now that Josephine is out of the picture, Napoleon needs a new wife. Here, we get the Treaty of Tilsit, although this happened in 1807, about 2 years before Napoleon divorced Josephine. Of course, we missed all of the 1806 and 1807 campaigns, but remember those sacred words from the best director ever.
How did you know, were you there?
I will say this, the actor playing Tsar Alexander I, Edouard Philipponnat, is actually quite decent in the role, being about the right age thankfully. Now, the historical meeting came at the end of the War of the Fourth Coalition. Austria had made peace with France after the defeat at Austerlitz, but the following year, Prussia finally decided to intervene. Instead of holding back and waiting for Russian reinforcements, they instead engaged Napoleon's army directly at the dual battles of Jena-Auerstadt, ending in defeat and smashing the martial prowess the Prussians had maintained since Frederick the Great. Prussia refused to make peace, and so the campaign continued, with the French advancing into Poland. Winter did not stop the fighting, leading to the Battle of Eylau in February 1807. Despite holding the field at the end of the fighting, the Russian army, who had by now linked up with what was left of the Prussian army, was not defeated, and the heavy casualties were a blow to Napoleon's prestige. By the summer, the situation had improved, and in June, Napoleon decisively routed the Russians at the Battle of Friedland, finally convincing the Tsar to make peace, leading to the Treaty of Tilsit. This occurred on a barge in the middle of the River Niemen, between the two armies. Once the Tsar met Napoleon in person, he actually got on quite well with him, as is shown in the film, although sadly the barge is not present, and instead they appear to be in the middle of a field. Of course, the real objective, making peace between France and Russia, and Prussia as well, but they basically got thrown under the bus and lost half their territory, is not really looked at. Instead, the scene is mainly Napoleon and the Tsar agreeing that they hate the British and will fight them economically. A crazy idea of Napoleon's that they should march via Constantinople to the Euphrates, and of course, the real reason for this scene. Trying to convince the Tsar he should marry one of his sisters to Napoleon. Of course, Napoleon did try and marry one of them, preferring a match with Russia compared to Austria, but we basically cut out all of that drama in the film. The next scene being a brief scene where the match with Marie-Louise is being arranged between the Austrian ambassador and Caulaincourt, who incorrectly refers to the Emperor of Austria as king, and then her turning up. This is annoying, since the machinations regarding who to marry was one of the primary reasons why Napoleon fell out with Talleyrand, the latter already becoming a bit disillusioned with the Emperor, favouring the Austrian match, and basically did everything he could to sabotage any chance of the Russian match going ahead. When Napoleon found out, he was furious, and at a fiery meeting, said the following to Talleyrand, and again, I will let Napoleon and Love show it for you.
I called you here today to remind you of the obedience and the loyalty which you owe me. I took you all for nothing! Nothing! And I made you all what you are now, grand dignitaries of my empire! All glory springs from me as a part of my glory which I can afford to bestow. The empire exists because of me, and in my person, the empire contains your princedoms and dominions. But I hear criticisms of my actions. I hear doubts. To doubt is the beginning of treason, and to differ from my policy is treason itself.
1,000 apologies, sire. Your messenger has only just found me.
Some of you have dared to act as if the succession to my imperial throne were already vacant. I make it clear to you that none of you will be my successor. The choice will be made by me, and you, Talleyrand, do not presume to think otherwise. Oh yes, you believe yourself to be a great man because you were noble before the revolution, because I send you with messages to czars and kings and emperors who flatter you in the hope of flattering me, in the hope of your betraying me! But I know you for what you are, a thief and a coward! You have never in your life served anyone faithfully. You'd sell your own father for a piece of gold. You have been plotting to destroy my friendship with the Tsar of Russia. Well, Prince Talleyrand, you have failed! I know you, Talleyrand. You would do anything to harm me. You hope to see me dead.
And France small again, weak again. Why don't I have you hang from the railings here? What are you? An infamous heap of corruption. A lump of dung in silk stockings!
Followed up by Talleyrand, after Napoleon had left the room, stating,
What a pity that such a great man should be so ill-bred.
Without those scenes, instead, Talleyrand kind of disappears from the movie. The next time we see him is at Napoleon's abdication, which he was not there for, and at the Congress of Vienna, where he is now loyal to King Louis XVIII. From a film perspective, the audience has no clue as to what happened between Napoleon and Talleyrand to cause the latter to be sidelined, and then switch sides as it were. Anyway, with the match with Austria arranged, and the War of the Fifth Coalition being completely forgotten, Napoleon can now meet his new wife. Marie Louise appears on screen for about 60 seconds. One inaccuracy right away is that their first meeting wasn't in a formal setting like this, particularly with a bunch of Austrian generals being present. When she first arrived in France, Marie Louise was stripped of her Austrian outfits, bathed, and then given French attire, as had been a tradition under the old monarchy. She was then accompanied by Caroline, Napoleon's sister, on her way to Paris. However, Napoleon grew impatient and rushed ahead to meet her, which was brilliantly portrayed by Ian Holm.
Caroline, you've spoiled it. I wanted it to be a surprise. I wanted to sit down and say I'm delighted to see you. I'm your husband.
In their one conversation, Napoleon asks her if he looks like his portrait, and she meekly says, even more handsome and strong. But during their actual first meeting, it was a bit more humorous. Again, I will refer back to the Ian Holm version, who did it justice.
You're 1,000 times more beautiful than your portrait.
And you are nicer looking than yours.
But it was a good one of me, wasn't it?
No, I thought you would look like Marshal Berthier.
Berthier?
Someone told me you were like him.
And he's old.
Yes, you're not so old.
I'm young. Well, I'm younger than Berthier.
Meanwhile... Do I resemble my portrait?
Oh, yes. Even more handsome and strong.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Then they go off to bed, and thankfully, within seconds, she has managed to produce an heir, so well done on that. And then she disappears for the rest of the movie. Ah well, at least he got to be on screen. Poor Murat. At least he got to be in Napoleon and Love, where he was portrayed by
the actor Peter Bowles.
Now we get the final scene between Napoleon and Josephine, where he shows her his newborn son, and like the rest of the movie, it is pretty lackluster. He walks up to her, smiling, gives her the baby while sad music plays, and then Josephine says,
Oh, sweet child, one day you will understand what I have sacrificed for you.
And that is it. The last scene between the two main characters, and only Josephine got any dialogue, not even a comment from Napoleon about the love of his life, nor his joy now that he has a son and heir, the one that Josephine could not give him. Compare again to Ian Holm's version, where they have an honest and friendly conversation, in which he states that if she had given him a son, they would have remained married.
May I ask you something quite different?
Anything, not about war.
If I had had a son by you, a king of Rome...
I should never have divorced you.
Do you say that to make me happier?
No. Does it make you happier?
Yes.
At one point, he asks her to try and cut down her spending, since he is still paying off her debts, which leads to this exchange.
Josephine, make me happier too.
Can I do that?
You are still living far beyond your means. I had to pay your debts yet again last month.
You do not change.
Nor you.
You've always paid my debts.
I suppose I always shall.
Thank you. For not changing.
Just in the look they give one another, you can feel the warmth and love that still exists between them. Meanwhile, Phoenix and Kirby have about as much warmth as a Yeti at the North Pole.
Lord Nelson's trousers, it's a Yeti!
Speaking of cold climates, the movie's version of the invasion of Russia is a bit of a mess. After the Josephine scene, we suddenly jump forward a few years, as Napoleon gives us the briefest explanation for the campaign ever.
My dear Josephine, I'm sad today. Tsar Alexander has turned against me and forced me to invade Russia. He's decided to open his ports to England while taxing the French. And so I command the combined forces of France, Austria, Italy, Germany, and Poland.
at least the basics are there, I guess, with Russia leaving the continental system. Shame we didn't mention that before now, that there was a continental system, but hey-ho. Again, I'm sorry I have to turn this into a joint review of Napoleon and Love, but whilst that series too rather skimmed over the reasons for the campaign, we got some good scenes like, for example, Napoleon saying goodbye to Marie-Louise before leaving, who does not want him to go. He then talks about his legacy and the future he wants to leave his son and heir.
Louise, do you know that I shall have been a great conqueror for more years than anyone else in the history of the world? And when I come back...
In 2 months.
In 2 months, our son, the King of Rome, will only have to stretch out his arms, and the world will be his.
Meanwhile, Napoleon's son follows his mother and also disappears from the movie at this point, never to be mentioned again. Even in the 1970 film Waterloo, there were scenes which showed Napoleon concerned about the fate of his son.
La Bedouille.
Yes, sir.
Do you have any children?
Yes, sire. I have one son. Very young. No taller than your boot.
And if he were with you, would you want him to be here today?
Yes. So he could see you, sire.
See me. You know I have a son. And I'd give anything in the world to see him. I'd give my heart, I'd give my life. But not here. I wouldn't want him to witness this battle today.
The only bit of the march into Russia we get is some Cossacks firing mortars, at the French column, upon which Marshal Ney rides off with some cavalry to pursue them, but instead finds a bunch of French cavalrymen impaled to trees. To be fair, there were a few skirmishes on the way into Russia, as the Tsar's army, save for Smolensk and a few other battles, did not fight Napoleon's main force. One fact the film doesn't really show us is just how harrowing the march into Russia was. Napoleon lost more men on the march to Moscow than he did on the way out, due to the severe heat, lack of supplies, and disease. One soldier, Lieutenant Vosler from the southern German kingdom of Württemberg, later wrote about the conditions. Before crossing the Niemen, we had been thoroughly parched by the persistent and oppressive heat. Thereafter, we endured 3 days of continuous and torrential rain, followed by alternating periods of unbearable heat and downpours the like of which I had never experienced. Many regiments had no more than 3-day supplies of rations, which, because of the total devastation of the countryside, could never be adequately replenished. 4/5 of the army subsisted on the flesh of exhausted, starving cattle, of which each regiment dragged at least one herd with it. Borodino, the single bloodiest day of the whole war, is reduced to less than a minute of slow-mo, that is, slower than Zack Snyder, on a mobility scooter racing a turtle. Only half of this footage was actually shot as being from that battle. The other half is recycled footage from the Marengo sequences, shown in the trailer, that were cut from the theatrical. Whether they will be in the may or may not be happening extended edition will remain to be seen. I don't know why they felt the need to include those scenes in there, particularly of Napoleon riding on horseback, since we can quite clearly see it as him in his Revolutionary era uniform, which he hasn't worn in ages by this point in the film. Not to mention the scene is flipped, unless Scott decided to have everyone be left-handed all of a sudden. Perhaps if you'd shot a bit less of Josephine in that table, you could have done a bit more with the carnage that was Borodino. Napoleon now marches into Moscow. These scenes were largely filmed at Blenheim Palace, which of course looks nothing like the Kremlin, but with the magic of CGI, you can make it look grey and dull like the rest of the film. I'll get back to that in the last section. Meanwhile, the inside shots here were apparently filmed at Westminster Cathedral, although there was apparently a bit of drama over that. See the trailer breakdown for more details. Anyway, there is a scene where he sits on the Tsar's throne that has been covered in pigeon poop. Sitting on a throne covered in poop is a pretty good analogy for the movie, really. Then, the city is burned by the Russians, and Napoleon is stunned that they would go to such lengths. Now, with his army stuck far in enemy territory, with supplies running out, his marshals urge him to retreat. Oh yes, Napoleon's marshals. How could I forget? Well, just like Ridley Scott, really. You may or may not have noticed up till now, but I've barely mentioned them. Historically, upon becoming emperor, Napoleon resurrected the old rank of Marshal of France that had existed under the monarchy, now becoming Marshal of the Empire, and promoted many of his ablest and most loyal subordinates to this rank. Many of these men became nearly as famous as Napoleon himself. Here are just a few of them. Marshal Murat, Napoleon's brother-in-law, the flamboyant cavalry officer, played in Napoleon and Love by
the actor Peter Bowles.
Marshal Ney, another cavalryman, well known for his red hair and his bravery. He led the rear guard during the retreat from Russia, and, rather infamously, a series of ill-fated cavalry charges at Waterloo. Marshal Lannes, a close friend of Napoleon, and widely considered to be his most capable commander. Mortally wounded at the Battle of Aspern-Essling in 1809, Napoleon personally came to see him and openly wept, one of the few occasions he was ever noted as doing so. Now, where are these interesting personalities in this movie? Well, the future Marshal Junot, who served with Napoleon almost from the beginning, is in the Toulon, Vendémiaire, and Egypt scenes, being the only marshal to be mentioned by name. He then goes into the background and practically disappears. A few of the marshals hang around at his coronation and at Austerlitz, but it is only in Russia and at his abdication that we really see them. The only ones here are Marshal Ney on the left, Marshal Berthier, Napoleon's famous organiser, is at the centre right, and Marshal Davout, the strict disciplinarian, is on the right, with General Caulaincourt, one of Napoleon's trusted subordinates, being here as well. It is just as well I told you about their traits, since this movie doesn't. It would not have taken much effort to try and add a little bit of character to them. Again, Napoleon and Love did. And this would have greatly helped the movie in showing the audience how Napoleon was able to achieve his victories. People like Berthier, organising the army, gave him the tools for success. Instead, all these marshals are only named in the credits, never on screen. Oh yes, and whilst we are here, we need to talk about something rather important. Ney's moustache and sideburns.
Get rid of those sideburns!
What sideburns?
You heard me, hippie!
Apart from when he was a very young man, you may notice that Marshal Ney was rather clean-shaven, and, as mentioned earlier, had very striking red hair, which is a bit different to Ney in this version. How did this come about? Well, John Hollingworth, who played Ney, gave us an answer. Please listen to this. When I walked into my first makeup and costume fitting to play Ney in Scott's historical epic Napoleon, the Italian makeup designer bashfully came up to me and said, "I showed you your picture to Ridley on his iPad and he drew all over your face the most incredible beard and said, 'Oh, give him this.' I laughed when I saw it, but with so many military characters in the film, Ridley wanted to make each of us visually distinct."
マジか。
マジです。
Just... why? I tell you what would make Marshal Ney visually distinct, giving him his red hair like he did have historically.
I thought I told you to trim those sideburns! Go home!
And why are you even bothering to make them look different, Mr. Scott, when you haven't even bothered to name most of the marshals on screen, let alone give them anything resembling a character? Oh well, at least their emperor here can give them some great lines to reassure them.
If we go back to Poland, we can wait out the winter months.
Oh, this is the man who conquered Europe? Really? Oh, it's all so tiring at this point.
I'm so tired.
Soon the French retreat from Moscow back to the Polish border. The retreat from Russia was a harrowing affair. Men dropped like flies in the snow. Cossacks terrorised the increasingly disorganised stragglers, and the men resorted to eating horses, and sometimes each other, in their desperation. On hand, though, is their emperor, who has a brilliant speech with which to rally their spirits.
We are winning!
What the hell sort of statement is that? It's quite obvious you are not winning at all, otherwise you would not be retreating from Moscow and freezing to death. This would be like the captain of the Titanic saying, "We're floating," as the ship breaks in half. And then, Napoleon abdicates. The campaign of 1813, which saw the 3-day Battle of Leipzig, the largest and deadliest battle of the war, the various other engagements, and then the whole of the 1814 campaign, which was actually one of his most brilliant, and all of the events leading up to his abdication and the mutiny of the marshals, gone. Not a mention. Nothing.
So you get nothing! You lose!
They imply that he gets back from Russia, and despite still having all this land and allies in early 1813, they just sit there for over a year and just go, "Yeah, you lost, lol, abdicate, bro." Again, do I need to wheel out Waterloo, where the marshals go point by point and tell Napoleon just how bad things have gone by April 1814, which again happened historically?
There's no hope, sire.
We are defeated, sire.
For 20 years we followed you.
We cannot even save the suburbs of Paris.
The Austrians, they're in Versailles. The Cossacks are watering the horses in the Seine. They can hear the Prussian cannon in Montmartre.
There are 4 nations, 4 armies, 4 fronts against us.
During his last campaigns, Napoleon had to lower the conscription age and send his men into battle poorly equipped, earning these men the nickname Marie Louises, after the young empress. I'm sorry, but bring in Ian Holm again. During the 1813 campaign, Prince Metternich of Austria tries to negotiate a peace between Napoleon and the Allies, but the Emperor refuses.
May I put my Emperor's view more positively? He wishes for a lasting peace in Europe. You are at war with Russia, with Prussia.
I smashed the Prussian army at Lutzen. I have thrown the Russians back at Bautzen. 2 great victories. You do not understand war. We won.
My Emperor hopes for a peace not achieved by victories, but by mediation.
A peace on terms dictated by Austria. I give up the whole of Germany. I give up Poland.
Yes.
What do I get in return?
Peace.
I am the guardian of the sacred interests of France. How could I accept terms which would be an outrage committed on my people and on my army, the greatest army that has ever existed?
Your Majesty, your army was lost in Russia.
I've more than made up my losses.
I've seen your new recruits, Your Majesty. They're babies.
Young men who fight like men. You do not understand what a soldier is. Your sovereigns, the 17th generation, be defeated 20 times and still go back to their royal palaces. I am the first generation. My reign will not outlast the day when I cease to be strong and therefore cease to be feared. I was brought up on a battlefield knowing that soldiers are killed in battle. So long as I am still strong, still feared, I do not concern myself much about the death of 1,000,000 men.
May I ask for the doors and windows to be opened, so that you may repeat those words to your army?
I wanted to join the new with the old, to unite the best of your Gothic traditions with the best of my modern ideas. For the first time in my life, I am not offering terms, but being offered them.
Does Your Majesty accept the terms?
Sooner than accept, I will bury the world beneath my ruins.
Where was this sort of energy in Napoleon? Where was this explanation for your motives? Anyway, Napoleon abdicates and goes off to Elba. Roll credits.
Somehow Napoleon returned.
Oh wait, we still got the 100 days. Now, historically, and in the film, Napoleon was exiled to the small Italian island of Elba with less than 1,000 of his men. He was allowed to rule the island as its emperor, and I will give the film a little credit in that they do show the rather unique flag of Elba that he created in these brief scenes. Meanwhile, the Bourbons, under King Louis XVIII, the brother of the executed Louis XVI, were restored, and the Great Power set about redrawing the map of Europe at the Congress of Vienna, which we will see later. Initially, the French people were broadly happy that the wars were over, and had hopes for the restored monarchy. Within 10 months, though, many were dissatisfied, fearing a return to the pre-1789 order. Meanwhile, the Great Powers were arguing over the map, and were seemingly disunited. Napoleon, ever the gambler, and seeing an opportunity, escaped from his island prison with his small guard of 1,000 men, and, by March of 1815, he had landed in France, thus beginning one of the most famous stories of his whole life. Of course, in Ridley Scott's version, what, or rather who, do you think is the motivation for his escape? Why yes, of course, Josephine again.
You maniacs! Damn you! Damn you all to hell!
Apparently, he's not so concerned with France and glory, and more with love and Josephine, mainly because she's been cavorting with the Tsar of Russia, although it is true that she did entertain the Tsar just after Napoleon's exile. A slight problem with Napoleon returning because of her is that, whilst with the Tsar, she went for a walk and caught a chill, which only got worse, and on the 29th of May 1814, nearly 9 months before the escape from Elba, she died. Yes, a bit of necromancy once again prolongs Josephine's life another year. In fact, I half wonder if someone, when writing the script, accidentally hit the 5 rather than the 4 on their keyboard when typing up the date of her death, since they do explicitly get the day and the month right, but not the year. This is rather pathetic. Even at one of his most glorious moments, we have to switch to Josephine once again. Well, she is dead now. She can't hurt us anymore. Anyway, back to the 100 days. We get a brief scene with King Louis XVIII, played by Ian McNeice, where he gets word of Napoleon's escape. Now, we have a historical source for the king's reaction when he got the news. Colonel Marie-Antoine de Rezé of the Garde du Corps wrote in his journal, having read the contents, he remained silent, then spent several moments with his head in his hands, deep in thought. Do you know what this telegraph contains? He at length asked Monsieur de Vitrolles, who was waiting for orders. No, sir, I do not. Well, I will tell you. It is revolution once more. Bonaparte has landed on the coast of Provence. Have this letter taken instantly to the Minister of War, so they can come and speak to me at once, and decide what steps are to be taken. And as Monsieur de Blacas was protesting at the folly of such an attempt, and on the little danger it constituted, His Majesty interrupted him with considerable impatience. Blacas, my dear friend, you are a very pleasant fellow, but that is not enough to make you sensible. You have been wrong on past occasions, and I am very much afraid you are once again deluding yourself. Now, do you think Ridley Scott portrayed this scene as it... Oh, you know the answer to this. Roll the clip.
Your Majesty.
You may speak. Bonaparte, Your Majesty. He has returned. Napoleon Bonaparte is marching towards Paris. More. Your Majesty.
Yeah, greeted with the news that the greatest general of that generation is marching on Paris to depose you, that would be my reaction. Just start gobbling up more food.
I wash myself with a rag on a stick.
The cavalcade of nonsense continues as we reach Grenoble. Again, in history, this was probably one of the most famous moments in Napoleon's life. With only 1,000 men, he was confronted by the soldiers of the 5th Regiment of the Line, who were merely the advanced guard of the forces sent to arrest him. Napoleon walked ahead of his troops towards the 5th, and told the men, "If you wish to kill your emperor, here I am." The soldiers, tired of the restored Bourbons, could not fire. Instead, they started crying, "Vive l'Empereur! Long live the Emperor!" and joined him. From this moment on, the king had no hope of stopping Napoleon on his march to Paris to reclaim his throne. This moment was quite brilliantly portrayed in Waterloo.
Soldiers of the 5th, do you recognize me? If you want to kill your emperor, here I am.
Fire! Vive l'Empereur!
Throughout the scene as well, the strains of La Victoire est à nous plays, with bits of La Marseillaise, building and building as the troops cheer their emperor. Now, Mr. Scott decided to do things a bit differently. Obvious comparison right off the bat is the small scale of the scene, with what looks like a few hundred troops involved, compared to the few thousand that were there. But that is not the main point. What is more important is what Napoleon says. Please listen to this, if you can.
Soldiers of the 5th Regiment, do you recognize me?
Wait a minute! Who are you?
Do you recognize me, soldiers?
Yes, Emperor!
I miss you. I'm melancholy for my home and for our victories together. I want to come home.
Hello! Hello! I'm cold and there are wolves after me.
Will you join me?
What was that performance? Why does he sound like a lovesick teenager whose partner won't return their calls? This is the man who galvanised the whole nation, led armies across Europe right to the gates of Moscow, and won glory along the way. If I were standing there in 1815 and this twerp waddled up to me, crying about how he wants to go home, I would have just opened fire on the spot.
You just keep right on driving.
Somehow, this works, and now Napoleon is back. And so, it's time to get together another coalition to take him down once and for all.
You're joking. Not another one?
It is here that the Duke of Wellington, played by a very elderly Rupert Everett,
It's been 84 years.
is suddenly thrust upon us in the last act of the movie at the Congress of Vienna, being presented here as Napoleon's primary antagonist. In Waterloo, Napoleon's marshals, when talking about the deteriorating situation at the start of the movie, mentioned Wellington, and Napoleon tells us that
Wellington? Why is it always Wellington? Wellington, 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 Wellington. Why are you all so afraid of Wellington? Is it because he beat you in Spain? Is that why?
Thus establishing, a long time before we actually meet the Duke, that this is a figure who, whilst having not yet fought Napoleon directly, has been a major thorn in his side, and made many of his best marshals worried. Here, he is just, well, here. Obviously, if you know a bit of history, you will know who he is, but if you don't, you are just presented with a man called Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Wellington, who really doesn't like Napoleon. And that is it. Whilst we are here, I should probably rant a bit about the portrayal of the Congress of Vienna. Historically, the Congress was called in the aftermath of the War of the Sixth Coalition to decide on the future shape of Europe, following nearly a quarter of a century of war and turmoil. All the great powers were present. The United Kingdom was represented by Lord Castlereagh, and later the Duke of Wellington. Russia by Tsar Alexander I, Austria by Prince Metternich, one of the most formidable statesmen of the era, Prussia by Prince von Hardenberg, although their king himself was also in Vienna. Even the newly restored Kingdom of France, represented by Talleyrand, attended, and the settlement agreed here would in some respects last until 1914. However, the Congress itself was not plain sailing. Russia, having the largest army in Europe, was keen to gain more territory, and wanted Polish land that had until 1807 been occupied by Prussia following the partitions. Prussia wanted land from Saxony and in the Ruhr, which was a worry for nearby Austria, who wanted to reassert its dominance in Germany after the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire in 1806. France obviously wanted to avoid losing as much territory as it could, and Britain, as was its policy, wanted to keep the balance of power and prevent any one of the other continental nations from growing too strong, which meant that whilst France was to lose land, it needed to be strong enough to survive to balance the others, particularly with the fragile Bourbon restoration. Naturally, all of these conflicting aims caused problems, and for a moment, there looks like there could be conflict over Saxony in particular. It was this news that partly convinced Napoleon in early 1815 that, with the former coalition squabbling amongst themselves, it was the time to strike and escape from Elba. However, Napoleon had miscalculated on this point. A compromise was already being drawn up between the powers by the time he landed. The squabbles over Poland, Saxony, and so on were nothing compared to the conflict that was now to come. Once Napoleon escaped, it became imperative to unite and declare war on him. And yes, they did declare war on the person of Napoleon, rather than his country. Here, though, it feels like a meeting of the UN. We even get the gout-riddled Louis XVIII teleporting here from McDonald's.
Get in my belly!
Also, why the hell is Wellington even chairing it? If this were done as an actual Congress, then we would have had more of the characters speaking their mind, rather than sitting there like naughty schoolboys, getting a lecture from Principal Wellington over here. And now, Waterloo, the longest battle sequence in the movie. You don't know how tempting it was to make this into its own separate video. Since there is so much wrong with the segment, I could probably rant for a few hours. We do start off with a scene that I did not mind as much, since it is one of the few that does actually try and establish the who, what, where, when, and why. Napoleon stands over a large map with flags on it, representing the various armies, talking the situation over to his generals.
250,000 men with the traitor, 25,000 men, 125,000 men, and 100,000 men against our 125,000 men. This is a fight on land. This is what Britain does not know how to do that I know. Strike quickly against Wellington and Blucher. Defeat them separately. Disallow them from uniting forces here.
Overall, this scene is roughly accurate. There are some minor quibbles over troop numbers, and I covered some of the stuff with the flags in the trailer breakdown, but the core of the story is there. Napoleon is vastly outnumbered, but, at the moment, only Wellington and Blucher's armies are in position. So, hoping to strike quickly, he aims to defeat both in turn before they can unite, setting up the final act of the Napoleonic Wars. However, after that scene, we skip to the day of Waterloo itself. Not a single mention is made of the great battles of Ligny and Quatre Bras, which set the stage for Napoleon's defeat 2 days later. Nor is there any reference to Grouchy's wing, and it being detached to pursue Blucher's defeated army. Not to worry though, at least we have the basics of Napoleon is fighting Wellington at Waterloo, and he only has limited time to win before Blucher arrives with his army. Surely Scott can't mess this one up. Right? Well, he does. Some of the more tactical aspects of the battle will be covered in the next section, but we will mainly be covering the story of the battle here. Before we get to the movie's version, it would be prudent to take a brief look at how the actual day went historically. On the 16th of June, 1815, two battles occurred. Quatre Bras between Napoleon's left wing, commanded by Marshal Ney, against some of Wellington's forces, and Ligny between Napoleon himself and the Prussian army under Blücher. Both battles ended in French victories, but, strategically, they set up Napoleon for defeat 2 days later. Due to a variety of cock-ups, the entire First Corps had not been committed to either battle, allowing both armies to escape and regroup. Napoleon decided to detach his right wing under Marshal Grouchy to pursue Blücher, whilst he took the rest to link up with Ney and go after Wellington, where they would meet 2 days later on the 18th in front of Mont Saint-Jean, not far from Waterloo. The fighting opened sometime around 11 o'clock, with an assault on the key farmhouse of Hougoumont on Wellington's right flank, but the British and German defenders held their ground. Throughout the day, Napoleon would continue to throw more men at it to no avail. At the same time, French troops attacked Wellington's left around the now almost forgotten farmhouses of La Haye and Papelotte, defended by German and Dutch troops. Here, the farmhouses would change hands several times, with heavy casualties for both sides. Sometime before 12 o'clock, a furious artillery barrage by the French commenced against Wellington's centre. Finally, at about 1:30, Napoleon ordered forward the Comte d'Erlon with his First Corps of infantry to attack it. At the same time, French troops also made their first assault on the centremost farmhouse of La Haye-Sainte, defended by about 400 men of the King's German Legion, but they were repulsed. Meanwhile, d'Erlon was advancing to the east of the farmhouse and came into contact with a brigade of Dutch and Belgian troops, who, after some fighting, were driven back. Keeping up the momentum, the French advanced, only to be met by British troops, who held d'Erlon and then repulsed him with a mass cavalry charge. However, the British cavalry regiments, most famous the Scots Greys, got too carried away and charged the French artillery, only in turn to be charged by French cavalry and decimated. The Scots Greys started the day with about 370 men. By the end, over 100 were dead and nearly as many wounded. With the battle at an effective stalemate, the main hope now for both sides was fresh troops. Napoleon's lay with Grouchy's corps that had been sent to pursue Blücher, and Wellington's was with the Prussian army that had been defeated 2 days before. As events transpired, Blücher kept his promise to Wellington, and from about 4 o'clock, units of the Prussian army started to appear around the village of Plancenoit on Napoleon's right flank, although the main army was still a few hours away. Grouchy, meanwhile, was busy fighting the Prussian rearguard at Wavre, and, controversially, would not take part in the battle at Waterloo. Around this time, Marshal Ney, mistaking Allied troop movements for a general withdrawal, personally led a series of mass cavalry charges against Wellington's centre to the west of La Haye-Sainte, but was met by British and other Allied troops in prepared anti-cavalry square formations. Without infantry or artillery support, the charges failed. After some time, though, and after finally bringing up some infantry and guns, Allied casualties started to mount, and Wellington's line began to waver. The Iron Duke is claimed to have said something along the lines of, "Give me the Prussians, or give me night." Ney, hoping one more charge could finally break the line, went to Napoleon for more men, having almost destroyed the French cavalry in his attacks. A furious Napoleon is alleged to have retorted, "What men? Do you expect me to make them?" or words to that effect. However, events were looking bad for the Allies. Most of the Prussian army had yet to arrive. Meanwhile, at around 6 o'clock, the French finally took La Haye-Sainte in the centre. Only 42 of the garrison managed to escape back to their own lines. An attempt by German troops to retake it ended in disaster, and now French artillery began to hammer the Allied line at close range. Napoleon did have one last reserve, the Imperial Guard. His proper Old Guard, the 1st and 2nd Regiments of Grenadiers and Chasseurs, had already been sent against the Prussians, but the 3rd and 4th, still capable soldiers in spite of their lack of coherent uniforms, were ready. However, at this moment he waited, and it wasn't until 7 o'clock that they attacked the centre, but in a series of staggered assaults. The delay gave Wellington enough time to reorganise his lines and prepare. Thus, each of the attacks by the Guard was repulsed. The Guard had a reputation for never retreating, so the sight of them falling back, coupled with the arrival of the bulk of the Prussian army at 8 o'clock, was enough to break the battered French army, and soon a general rout ensued. The day had been bloody. Of the 72,000 French troops, 25,000 were killed or wounded, with another 8,000 captured. The Allies too had suffered, with Wellington losing 15,000 of his 68,000, and Blücher 7,000 of his 50,000 men. After the battle, the two Allied commanders met at the inn called La Belle Alliance, which had been Napoleon's headquarters. Wellington spoke no German, and Blücher spoke no English, but the latter did know one phrase in French, quelle affaire. Now, of course, I was not expecting all of that to make it into the movie, but sadly, we barely got any of it. After a spot of breakfast, both generals leave their respective tents. Wellington has a look through his telescope and sees Napoleon.
Now there he is. He appears to be just sleeping.
He's just standing there, menacingly!
A stupid thing happens after this, which will be in the next section. After that, old Sleepy Boney wakes up and starts to bombard the enemy position. Again, you should probably have moved your baggage to the rear, Wellington, because now there are a bunch of cannonballs ripping through it. You might notice something that is a little bit different from the maps and paintings we saw earlier. In the real battle, the men were deployed in a variety of columns and lines. Here, they are in trenches with spikes and fleches that would seem more at place at the siege of Sevastopol in the Crimean War or at Petersburg in the American Civil War, roughly half a century later. Yes, you would dig in if besieging a fort or city, but that's the point. This is the Battle of Waterloo. It is meant to be huge formations marching around, grand charges and colourful uniforms that make for a visual spectacle. Instead, we follow one of the most half-arsed Napoleonic battle scenes ever put to film, with World War I tactics, men abandoning entrenched positions to advance against cavalry, and other nonsense that will be looked at in more detail next section. Ironically, the few places that were fortified to an extent, the various farmhouses like Hougoumont and La Haye Sainte, are completely absent, save for a fleeting glimpse of the former burning in the background of one scene, despite their critical importance in the battle. It would be like doing the Battle of Stamford Bridge and removing the, oh wait, they actually did that. Anyway, back to 1815. Before the artillery barrage, we get one scene with the Prussian army on the march, and the only voice line from Blücher, telling a British courier, Blücher speaking perfect English here, despite the fact he historically didn't even know the language, that he will be about 5 hours. He would arrive sooner, but he has decided on going cross-country after a massive rainstorm with 50,000 men. The neat thing about Belgium is that it has lots of these things called roads. You can use them to march around on, meaning you can reach the battlefield faster. But he forgot about that apparently. Also, I should save this for the next section, but the courier asks him his
estimated time of arrival, sir.
This is a military campaign, not a holiday to Cornwall with a broken sat-nav. Meanwhile, back at Waterloo, the ebb and flow of the battle is non-existent. The French fire their artillery, a bunch of them advance, they get defeated. Ney randomly charges with his cavalry, they get defeated, etc. Nowhere do the British actually lose, or look like they're going to lose. It feels more like a battle in a total war game, where you can just stand your units in a big line, and the stupid AI just charges you, compared to the real battle where Wellington suffered losses, such as the Scots Greys and La Haye Sainte. Here, there is no tension, since the British are on steroids in this version from the looks of it. Oh yes, and I say the British, since Ridley Scott has completely erased the various German states and the Dutch Belgians from Waterloo. Not even a token unit makes an appearance. The British squares in the movie also seem to be barely affected by the French cavalry charge. The men later reform in quite good order. In reality, it was a bit different, what with the French cavalry using their pistols and carbines, which are non-existent in the movie, and the French artillery later on started to support the charges. Ensign Grono, of the 1st Foot Guards, related this account. During the battle, our squares presented a shocking sight. Inside, we were nearly suffocated by the smoke and smell from burned cartridges. It was impossible to move a yard without treading upon a wounded comrade, or upon the bodies of the dead, and the loud groans of the wounded and dying was most appalling. One thing that was cut from the theatrical release was Napoleon's illness that day. For some years, his health had been declining, and at Waterloo, it may have impacted his decisions that day, although to what extent is debatable. Scott did mention in an interview that it was filmed, but David Scarpa cut it completely. Although, to be fair, perhaps repeated scenes of him crapping himself would have slowed things down a bit. Nevertheless, apart from a brief scene of him telling Ney to get out of his tent and looking a bit flustered, we don't get any reference to an important aspect of his life that should have been here. Colonel Auguste Louis Petier of the 7th Hussars was serving on Marshal Soult's staff, and was thus close to Napoleon, Soult being Napoleon's chief of staff. Petier left this account, detailing just how much the Emperor had deteriorated. Furthermore, it was noticeable during this campaign that he remained on horseback much less than in the past. When he dismounted, either to study his maps, or else to send messages or reports, members of his staff would set before him a small deal table and a rough chair made of the same wood, and on this he would remain seated for long periods at a time. His stoutness, his dull white complexion, his heavy walk made him appear very different from the General Bonaparte I had seen at the start of my career in 1800 in Italy, when he was so alarmingly thin that no soldier in his army could understand how, with so frail a body and looking as ill as he did, he could stand such fatigue. For a film that is meant to be about the character of Napoleon, detailing his whole life, it would perhaps be a good idea to compare and contrast with the earlier energetic Napoleon and the lethargic emperor at Waterloo. But then again, this Napoleon has been old and lethargic throughout. Back to the film. After Ney's cavalry charge, does the famous advance of the Imperial Guard happen in this version? Nope. Other than about a dozen guys saluting him here, no mention of the old guard. In fact, apart from at Notre Dame, Austerlitz and Tilsit, the guards are not seen, and they are never mentioned at all by name, which is insulting to arguably the most famous troops of the whole period. Instead, whilst Ney is still fighting with his cavalry, Napoleon prepares some random infantry, and once Ney falls back and joins him, Napoleon then charges in himself into the battle. As we saw earlier, Napoleon could barely stay standing during this campaign, let alone charge in and start fighting. What in the name of Napoleon's shriveled gentleman sausage induced Mr. Scott to have this in the film? Hell, according to him, he did film all the stuff from Napoleon's illness, but cut it from the theatrical. So, if he knew he was ill, why did he still do a scene of him kamikazing the British? Wellington also sends in his own cavalry, who were historically pretty much destroyed earlier in the day, but that is the least of our problems. Anyway, after this, the fighting devolved into recreation of the Battle of Pearl Harbor by the Batley Towns Women's Guild, until the Prussians finally turn up. From the wrong side, since they were coming from the east historically, and here they... oh, never mind. Also, they had been fighting for some hours by this point, but again, I wasn't there, so how would I know?
How did you know? Were you there?
Well, it's all over. Oh God, we still have more than 5 minutes to go. Please end. The final part of the movie is a complete damp squib. After losing at Waterloo, Napoleon is aboard HMS Bellerophon, the real-life HMS Victory in Portsmouth standing in for it, which was a good choice as a filming location. Bellerophon was the closest Napoleon would ever come to setting foot on British soil. After his defeat at Waterloo, he abdicated for a second time, and initially hoped to escape to America. But, when that became impossible, he decided to surrender to the British, hoping they would give him asylum, and spent some time on HMS Bellerophon since Blücher had promised to shoot him. Here, they decide to inaccurately have the Duke of Wellington come to tell Napoleon in person. Wellington, of course, never met Napoleon. But hey, this happens sometimes, having figures meet who are antagonists. Elizabeth I and Mary Queen of Scots often meet in Tudor dramas, for example, and it can be a good opportunity to see these differing personalities clash. We don't really get that here.
And this breakfast? Now I know why you have such a successful navy.
Have you ever visited the English countryside? Imagine all of the Cotswolds.
My dear sir, it is only by a narrow margin of opinion that you have been spared the fate of being shot. Politically, I'm afraid it's impossible for the British government to allow you to stay in England. You are permitted 3 officers and 12 servants to accompany you into exile. Exile will be contained to the island of St. Helena. It's a small island. More of a rock, really. 1,000 miles from the mainland of Africa. You don't have time to reflect.
Yeah, what was the point of having them meet if this was all the depth we were going to get? After arriving on St. Helena...
Don't tell me I'm still on that feckin' island!
He mopes around a bit, looks at a dead fly, and then we get a brief scene where he talks to Betsy Balcom. Sorry, Girl St. Helena 1, who historically befriended him during his exile, although she left 3 years before his death. Speaking of death, aside from the desire for it to take me,
finally, God, take me.
We see the end of the Emperor. Historically, his decline was rather slow and painful, and he died in his bed surrounded by many of his officers, and as the end credits say, allegedly Josephine was his last word. This is a scene that has been depicted quite a few times. Now, given the pattern we have seen in this film, what do you think happens? A. He dies in bed. B. He dies off screen. C. He gets reincarnated into an isekai. Or D. Josephine's ghost chastises him and he flops over. And the answer is... Congratulations, you have won crippling depression.
Off to hang myself, horse and left!
Yeah, we could have had some bits with his physical health deteriorating in his last days, which would fit in well if that had been in the Waterloo segment, but no. Even from beyond the grave, Josephine has to dominate Napoleon. And, finally, that is it.
Yes! Yes!
The thing is, this story could have easily been told if it was much more laser-focused on a part of his life. I would personally suggest his rise to power, ending with the aftermath of his coup in 1799, or, at a push, his coronation as emperor. To illustrate this, let us have a look at a 2-part movie series from 1989, La Révolution Française. It was made to commemorate the bicentennial of the French Revolution. Part 1, The Years of Light, covering the beginnings of the revolution in 1789, and the hopeful years of the early 1790s, before spiralling out of control, and ending with the storming of the Tuileries Palace and the end of the monarchy. Part 2, The Years of Terror, sees about 80% of the main cast of Part 1 get their heads chopped off on the guillotine, as the revolution first claims the king, and then eats its own, before ending with the downfall of Robespierre and the end of the terror. Each film is about 2 3/4 hours long, and only covers about 2 or 3 years apiece. Even then, it still had to go quite quickly in some places, particularly Part 1. Nevertheless, the fact that it was more focused on a certain time period allowed us to develop the characters a lot more. King Louis XVI is shown to be a man out of his depth, but he is at heart a good man who loves his family and does genuinely want to do what is right. Marie Antoinette is more domineering, but she is also a loving mother, and throughout the series sees her eldest son die, her nation ripped apart, her husband killed, her children taken from her, and finally her ultimate demise. On the revolutionary side, Robespierre is initially seen as being a keen reformer, who slides into becoming the face of the terror, ultimately sending his childhood friend Desmoulins to the guillotine. The scene where he is denounced by the assembly and called a tyrant is one of the best of the whole movie. There are some inaccuracies here and there, and major events like the French Revolutionary War, with the exception of the earlier battles of the Belgian frontier and Valmy, happen off-screen. But overall, it is a very decent attempt at showing how this pivotal event progressed. Notice here that none of the characters are made out as immature children who throw stroppy tantrums, nor are the films focused on the love life of, say, King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, or Camille and Lucille Desmoulins. We are given a lot of information as to why these events happen and what motivates the people involved. Meanwhile, in Napoleon, what the hell were the characters' motivations? Napoleon goes from mocking the idea of becoming a monarch in one scene to 2 scenes later suddenly becoming emperor. Other than there being some brief narration about Russia trading with Britain, why is Napoleon suddenly invading Russia? This is why you cannot do the whole life of Napoleon in just one movie. If it took 5.5 hours to cover the 1789 to 94 period in the 1989 films, how on earth was Scott expected to do nearly 25 years in half that time? Of course, adhering to historical facts would require a man who actually had an interest in telling the truth, but I see little evidence of that in Napoleon. Exhibit A, Ridley Scott.
Excuse me, Mr. Zombie, sir. Could you stop destroying history with your evil zombie magic, please?
Why he wanted to do a Napoleon movie is a bit of a mystery. Granted, he had done The Duelist back in the 80s, but if he was so passionate about this man and his story, you would have thought back in his heyday, or even a decade or 2 ago, would have been the time to do so. In the late 90s and early 2000s, historical-ish epics were having a brief revival, with stuff like Troy, Alexander, and of course Ridley Scott's own Gladiator and Kingdom of Heaven being prime examples. Joaquin Phoenix would also have been at a more reasonable age to play the Emperor, although Kirby would have been a teenager at that point, so I think a casting change there would have been necessary. However, he did not make it then, and as far as I'm aware, there was no mention of him even planning to do a Napoleon film, despite claims that this was his passion project. He does at least have a clear idea as to how many books have been written about Napoleon.
There's 400 books being written about Napoleon Bonaparte. 400. So there's 2,500 books written about him. You probably don't know this. There's been 10,400 books written about Napoleon Bonaparte. You know that?
10,000.
Well, with all that knowledge of how many books there are about the man, he surely must have read a few of them, right?
There are 10,400 books written about Napoleon Bonaparte. You know that?
I love books.
And how many of those books did you read?
My writer read all of them.
Oh,
okay.
Oh dear. I think we're beginning to get a better picture of how we ended up in this mess. Things did not stop there. After the trailer, some people, me included, critiqued it, most notably Dan Snow. Scott reacted a bit badly to the very light criticism from Snow, if I may say so.
You and I are enemies now.
Of course, Snow then had Scott onto his podcast to promote the movie, and proceeded to not question him as much about the inaccuracies, which led to the immortal line,
How did you know? Were you there?
And then, weeks before the film came out, Scott scuppered a lot of goodwill with the audience who, despite the inaccuracies, generally seemed hopeful about the film. He proceeded to go on a spree of comments about how he had Napoleon shooting the pyramids, how the French did not like themselves, and so on. There were other factors involved for sure, but Scott's attitude to the history was a major reason why the film was so derided by audiences and critics alike. Well, most of them anyway. It was obvious from the start, though, that he was going to be like this. Way back when the film was in production, he brought up the 1970 film Waterloo. It has its flaws, but it was a pretty good snapshot of the last battle of Napoleon's career, with brilliant battle scenes, and even the character bits in between really helping to flesh out the movie. Did Ridley Scott agree with this? Well, let us read his comments. No, you can't do the whole of Napoleon's story in one film. You'll bore the arse off everyone. Have you ever watched Waterloo? Holy F, that's just one battle. I'm sorry, Sergei Bondarchuk, you've got to be very careful in battle films that you understand what's going on. Otherwise they very quickly wear out and get boring. I don't care how majestic it is. I don't care how many uniforms you got. It gets boring. Napoleon had about 61 battles. Bondarchuk tried to do it with 1. You can't tell Napoleon in 1 either, because we're meeting him at the end of his life as a leader, and he would go on another 6 years after Waterloo, when he was in prison on St. Helena. I feel you can't do Napoleon in 1 battle, so I narrowed it down to this. Almost always, the best films are driven by the characters. And we'll come to superheroes after this if you want, because I'll crush it. I'll effing crush it. They're effing boring as S.
You are made of stupid.
I think it is pretty apparent which is the more boring. Would you rather be sat on your bum, watching Waterloo, or watching Napoleon bum? And I'm not going to finish that joke. Moving swiftly on. Exhibit B, Joaquin Phoenix.
You think you're so great because you have boats!
As the lead actor, and the man playing the character the film is named after, you would hope that he would do some research, or, at the very least, have a bit of an interest in the guy. Well, from what I can see, he did not. And in fact, he seemed to actively shun any attempt to learn more about the man he was playing, which is not a good thing. For example, at one point, he and Ridley Scott visited the Musée de l'Armée in Paris, which is in Les Invalides, where Napoleon happens to be buried. As expected, the museum has a rather extensive collection of Napoleonic artifacts. And what better way to promote the film than for Ridley Scott and Joaquin Phoenix to pay a visit? Well, it did not go well. While Scott, to his credit, did seem interested in the museum, Phoenix, whilst having some moments where he does somewhat know what he is talking about, eventually seems to have taken a rather pessimistic tone.
You know what this is?
Napoleon's hat?
Nobody knows. These are objects people find and they put them up here and they say, yeah.
But look at this one. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Never quite looks the same.
I, for one, if presented with something personally associated with one of the greatest generals in history, would not be so blasé. Come on now, he is just joking. He isn't being that insulting. Oh dear viewer, it only gets worse. He then sees Napoleon's sword.
And to see real objects from his life, does it make you feel...
Well, these are replicas. That's plastic.
The sword over there, the one on the right, is truly the one he had with him.
Oh, they say that, but I mean, we have a museum. No,
Yeah.
it's
How do you know that's
incredible.
his hat? Have you done the DNA?
I think they have.
Finally, he leaves.
We need to go to another room.
Yep.
Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I have to go now. My planet needs me.
À l'origine, Joaquin n'était pas censé être avec nous. On a eu la chance de l'avoir, mais là, il doit partir.
Now, the video does state that Joaquin wasn't originally meant to be there that day, and presumably he was added at the last minute, but then had to leave early. I'm going a bit tinfoil hat theory here, but I half wonder if that is not quite true, and he actually just got fed up and left. Again, I have no firm evidence for this. This is just purely from his reactions. One of the historical advisors, Loris Chevalier, more on him soon, has claimed Phoenix did go and do research, but I personally doubt that. Either way, this is a trend I hate in modern films and series, where having little to no interest, and sometimes even pure hatred of the character and the setting you are playing in, is seen as a virtue, whilst having an interest is frowned upon. At least Joaquin did try and talk a bit about the man, but he fell far short in this regard, pardon the pun. Now, during the promotion for the film, this little nugget came out from Ridley Scott himself. He'll come in and you're effing 2 weeks out, and he'll say, "I don't know what to do," Scott said about Phoenix. I'll say, "What? I don't know what to do." "Oh God," I said, "come in, sit down." We sat for 10 days, all day, talking scene by scene. In a sense we rehearsed, absolutely detail by detail. Some good forward planning there. Several months later, however, Joaquin Phoenix quit acting in a gay movie. No, literally, that's what the reports called it. And after he quit, this claim was included in the article. The actor is indeed known to get cold feet ahead of filming on various projects. 2 sources tell THR that he threatened to leave Ridley Scott's Napoleon unless his The Master filmmaker, Paul Thomas Anderson, was brought in to do rewrites. Placated, he stayed aboard the project, and it arrived in theatres late last year. Now, it must be stated, these are rumours. However, given the previous comments about him changing the script to suit his needs, and my own tinfoil hat conspiracy, I have a feeling we have a bit of evidence as to who was partly responsible for the mess that came onto our screens. Granted, it could have been the other way around, and perhaps the original was even worse, but since I've seen little evidence that Phoenix had any interest in the real-life Napoleon, I am wondering if he should take some of the blame for this. What about the historical advisors on this project? Could they have kept Phoenix and Scott in line? Well, therein lies another problem. Exhibit C.
Look at me, I'm a famous historian! Out of my way!
3 men were brought on by Scott as advisors: Michael Broers, Loris Chevalier, and Paul Bidis. Broers is a professor who specialises in the Napoleonic era, and has written a fair few books on the man, although I must admit I have never come into contact with any of them, so I cannot state how good his works are. Not that this matters, since he has barely talked about his involvement outside of a few interviews, including this line. "As a moviegoer, I loved it as a film," he tells Yahoo Entertainment. "I had to learn very quickly that we are making a movie, not a docudrama. They're both held to different standards. I don't think we would get on too well." However, Broers seems to have been more present in the early stages, and to what extent is debatable. It could well be he was overruled, but of course has to keep up appearances and praise the film. Loris Chevalier, however, was more involved, and got the job because he had previously worked on Scott's film The Last Duel.
So I am a scholar.
He was a scholar and a
I've got my PhD in medieval history. I worked with Ridley on The Last Duel. On the last day of the shoot, he said, "Well, I'm doing a movie, and then I'm doing another one, which is based on Napoleon. How good are you?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm not scholarly good on Napoleon, but I could be."
I'm skeptical that you could, yet intrigued that you may.
And had a year to focus on Napoleon and Josephine's relationship.
I'm sorry, but why the hell would you hire a guy whose field of expertise is hundreds of years before the Napoleonic era? It would be like if I was hired to write the next Barbie movie. All I know is she likes pink, she's blonde, and she is a doll. Well, I suppose I could have her reenact the Battle of Leipzig. Apparently, one of the reasons why Chevalier was hired is because he gets on so well with Scott. leading to this funny bit of info.
The first meeting I had with Ridley, and he said to me, he said, on Gladiator, I actually fired 7 historical advisors. Don't bother me with shit.
My, such a brave and handsome group.
Oh, Tarn. I'm afraid it'll soon be over for us.
Well, the picture becomes even clearer. Turns out Ridley Scott runs his films like Joseph Stalin running the Soviet Union. Obviously, directors need to be confident, but purging a massive chunk of critics like that can lead to disaster, and lead to situations like Napoleon. Then there was the third advisor, Paul Bidis, who dealt with the military side of things, and had previously advised ITV's more recent adaptation of Vanity Fair, namely the Waterloo sequences, which were far more accurate than those in Napoleon. You would have thought the same guy doing both would have had an impact, but no. He appeared on the Critical Drinkers channel to talk about Napoleon, and, well, he kind of turned into a mixture of Uwe Boll and the North FC meme when confronted about how terrible the movie is.
I was a parachute regiment soldier. That's all you need to know.
I'll have you know, I graduated top of my class in the Navy SEALs, and I've been involved in numerous secret raids in Al-Qaeda, and I have over 300 confirmed kills.
Yeah, there's so many different variables that people that, they comment on these and they really don't have a clue on what work. Quite amusing, some of the stuff you see coming out, but at the end of the day, it's social media. Yeah. Opinions are like, and everyone's got one. Yeah. Sometimes suck it up and know that there's going to be lots of people that are going to be jumping on the internet going, I couldn't help but notice. So there you go. Because I saw the storyboards. Now Ridley draws everything, but he's got an image in his head. He knows what happened at Waterloo. But visually, he wants to show something rather than just a field.
Parking facilities are unavailable.
And it wasn't really a trench, it was like more a shell scrape. I wrote it down in notes and I just explained, look, there was no time to dig in. But, and then we vocalised it, and it was just like, well, no, that's what's happening. Actually, it was already dug by the time we got up to the wreckage. We were looking at it, trying to poke my eyes out, but it is what it is. Again, it is what it is, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's out of your hands, and so you just have to make the best of it.
This excuse is a rather pathetic one. Okay, it was too late to stop him building the set, but that is the problem. Why were you not there telling him when he was writing the damned thing? That is when the historical advisor should be consulted, not when the cameras are about to roll. This would be like telling Hitler he shouldn't invade Russia just as the Red Army is surrounding Berlin. It doesn't matter if you have a guy on set who could critique the buttons or the plumes, you need people in the writing room to make it accurate. Hell, I would say the buck starts at the very beginning. You need someone to pitch it who has a genuine passion and knowledge of the topic, not a senile has-been director. Back in 1972, the BBC made a series on King Henry VII called The Shadow of the Tower. Rosemary Ann Sisson, one of the writers, was interviewed in her later years and had this to say on the topic of accuracy when dealing with the writing. Dead people have the same rights as we have, and I think it is wicked, yes, wicked, to tamper with the facts. In many ways, the real story is often better than some easy bit of dramatic license. My job is to interpret the behaviour of a historical character, but never to change it. To conclude this massive section, I will reiterate my call for Ridley Scott to be put in an old folks' home, or to be exiled to a small island in the Atlantic, whatever the Congress decides.
You think you're so great because you have boats!
One of the few redeeming features of the movie are the costumes, which I did go into a bit in the trailer breakdown video, so I will redirect you to that at certain points, but I will elaborate on further where needed. The early part of the film takes place during the Revolution, and, for the most part, the uniforms are accurate. Even the brief, fleeting glimpses of the Garde Suisse at the Tuileries Palace appear to show them in their red tunics faced blue. The only inaccuracy I can notice being the epaulets on what are meant to be line infantry. Epaulets, of course, being reserved more for NCOs and officers. The revolutionary troops are in blue tunics and wear tricorns at the start, with a few in the style of helmets, switching to shakos much later in the movie, well into Napoleon's reign as emperor, which is also accurate. They even managed to have the troops in the Bardin tunic at Waterloo, which differed from the early one used. Even during the brief look at the Bourbon Restoration, they did a good job with the units of the re-established Maison du Roi, with these riders wearing the uniform of the briefly reformed Musketeers, the descendants of the regiment made famous by Alexandre Dumas' novel. There was a bit of reusing of some costumes in places, the most egregious being when Napoleon is addressing his generals before the Waterloo campaign, in which a bunch of them at the back are wearing their old Republican-era uniforms, that would not have been used for more than a decade by that point. Oh, and during the Russian campaign, some of them have jumped the gun and are wearing their Bourbon shako plates and white cockades. Other than that, I can't think of too much on the costume side of things to be too critical about. I'll reserve comments about civilian clothing, particularly female dress and the like, to those more knowledgeable, but just comparing it to portraits and so forth, they seem to be fairly well done. Unfortunately, the authenticity pretty much ends with the costumes. In terms of the battles and their tactics, barely anything resembles the truth. I have gone into some specific battle strategies earlier, but generally, in terms of the tactics troops would use, it can be best summed up roughly as follows. The section, or a squad if you will, was the smallest unit of about a dozen or so men led by a corporal. Several sections made up a company led by a captain. Several companies made a battalion, which in this era numbered anywhere from a few hundred to 1,000 men depending on the army. 2 or more battalions made up a regiment, with the exception of the British Army, where regiments are administrative. 2 or more a brigade, again except the British Army, where 4 battalions was the norm. 2 or more brigades made a division, and 2 or more divisions made a corps, with these units being ad hoc grouped into armies as needed. Most infantry were line regiments, standing almost shoulder to shoulder in battle, and would usually adopt 3 types of formations. Column when advancing to attack an enemy, which would see a mass of men several ranks deep advancing. Line formation when shooting and or defending a position, in which the men would only be 2 or 3 ranks deep, but allowing all the men to fire their muskets. And square formation when defending from enemy cavalry, where several ranks of troops would, as the name suggests, form into a hollow square formation to prevent the cavalry from outflanking them, whilst also protecting the drummers, officers and colour bearers. Some regiments were light infantry, like the famous 95th Rifles of the British Army, who would often rush ahead of the line in skirmish formation to pick off enemy officers ahead of the main fighting. Most line regiments would also have a company of light infantry in some fashion, and also a company of grenadiers, who were the elite troops. Of course, famously, Napoleon also had his Old Guard, who were veterans of many campaigns, and some of these were organised into regiments of grenadiers and chasseurs. Now, in Napoleon, we do not really see these formations in action. The only pitched battles we see in the movie are basically Austerlitz, the very brief Borodino scene, with repurposed Marengo footage, and Waterloo. At Austerlitz, everyone just charges and runs around like headless chickens. Borodino has nothing, and then there is Waterloo.
We will be slaughtered the minute we mince up the hill.
The French advance in the movie, which is sort of meant to represent Delon's corps, looks more like the First World War, with the men advancing forward in a thin line, as opposed to column. Admittedly, Delon had thinned his columns out so more of his men could fire, but not to this extent, nor would all of his men started doing skirmishing as they attacked. We do get square formations, but instead of being behind the reverse slope, Wellington advances his men towards the charging French cavalry, abandoning the stupid inaccurate trenches that would have protected his men and prevent the French cavalry from attacking him anyway.
Excellent. I have a superb plan which cannot fail but results in the complete destruction of the French army. Splendid!
I don't need to explain why the kamikaze charge at the end is stupid, but what I can do, though, is show you the worst thing I think I've ever seen in a Napoleonic film. My jaw nearly hit the floor when we were presented with the 95th Rifles, including a man, Private Lee Harvey Sharpswald, who has strapped a telescope to his Baker rifle and tells the Duke of Wellington he has a shot on Napoleon, who is the other side of the battlefield.
Baby.
Now, yes, at one point during the day, allegedly, an officer of the Royal Artillery informed the Duke that his cannons had a shot on Napoleon, to which the Duke is meant to have replied that generals do not fire upon one another, or words to that effect. That scene is shown in Waterloo, and works well to show the Iron Duke has a sense of chivalry, if that is the right word. Why the hell then was it changed to a sniper targeting Napoleon miles away? You have cannons right there. You just have to give the line to a Royal Artillery officer with a telescope and you could easily fix the problem. Oh yeah, and then Sharpswald shoots Napoleon's hat off later in the movie. Woo, great job.
God, I'm brilliant. You know, I surprise myself sometimes. I really do.
Then there's this weird thing with the Scouts. Historically, cavalry have been used by armies to ride ahead and look over the terrain, spot enemy forces, and so forth to keep their commanders informed. An army that failed to scout properly could run into serious trouble on the battlefield, as Robert E. Lee found out at Gettysburg, for example. So it is only natural to show some scouts. Even something simple as showing a cavalryman observing the enemy force gets the Ridley Scott treatment. Here, the French and British scouts have a spare horse with them, which halfway through their ride back to camp they switch over to. This is completely nonsensical. Yes, when they would reach a friendly unit or headquarters, they could then ask for a new fresh horse to keep going. Even Waterloo mentions this when Muffling says,
Oblige me with a fresh horse, sir.
What you do not do is bring the fresh horse with you, because that defies the whole point. You're riding both horses at the same time, at the same speed. Ergo, both will be in pretty much the same condition, as in knackered, meaning you do not have a fresh horse with which to ride faster. What drugs do you have to be taking to come up with such a stupid concept like this? Outside of the military side of things, language in the movie is pretty much inauthentic throughout. Now, obviously, I wasn't going into this expecting the French characters to be speaking French or using an accent. A shame, but then the very British Ian Holm is my favourite Napoleon, so I can't complain. What I can complain about is how people talk to one another. Unless you have been living amongst the highest peaks of the Himalayas, then you may have heard about the following scene. During Napoleon's time as First Consul, he speaks to Lord Whitworth, the British ambassador, where he asks him if he is aware of the letter of peace he has sent him. Side note, Britain and France were already at peace. The Treaty of Amiens had finally ended hostilities, and from 1802 to 1803, there was a brief period where the two countries weren't fighting, which allowed Britain to have Lord Whitworth there as ambassador, since if they were at war, there wouldn't be an ambassador there in the first place. What the scene is meant to show is a historical event where Napoleon, annoyed by what he saw as Britain not upholding their end of Amiens, confronted the ambassador in a fiery spectacle. According to accounts, Napoleon loudly proclaimed that, "Woe to those who do not respect treaties. They will be responsible to all Europe." According to Whitworth, Napoleon then stormed out, repeating the last phrase. He would meet the First Consul again one more time, but by then it was clear peace was no longer possible, and war broke out once again. Now, in this version, Napoleon starts to give a speech that sounds half reasonable, before this line.
You think you're so great because you have boats!
Do I even need to explain why this line is so terrible? It sounds like something my 5-year-old nephew would say in a school play. The historical line of, "They will be responsible to all Europe," is a threat. Napoleon there is going to bring down the might of his whole soon-to-be empire and vassal states upon Britain. You think you are so great because you have boats is a childish insult, and I was half expecting Whitworth to turn around and steal Napoleon's lunch money. If you want to have a line that conveyed Britain's maritime strength in a manner that Napoleon would have delivered it, then you could have adapted his historical quote about how, if you could have control of the channel for but 1 hour, then you would have the world. Perhaps something like, "You may command the seas, sir, but I have to control the channel for only 1 hour, and then I will have the whole world." But then again, what do I know? I wasn't there.
How did you know were you there?
The infamous boat line is but the worst example. The rest of the dialogue is borderline insulting.
I was staring at your face. Added to which the discovery that my wife is a...
No, I am eating my breakfast. I am enjoying a succulent breakfast.
You are empty.
You're fat.
Destiny has brought me here. Destiny has brought me this lamb chop. We are winning!
Considering the number of great historical quotes the man said, what the hell were you thinking? Waterloo managed to do what you could not back in 1970.
If you want to kill your emperor, here I am.
On a field of battle, his hat is worth 50,000 men.
Never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake. That's bad manners, eh?
They're coming on in the same old style.
So we'll have to meet them in the same old style.
Next to a battle lost, the saddest thing is a battle won.
If only we had something else we could put it next to. And so, as usual in a Laughing Cavalier video, we need to compare it unfavourably to an anime. And today's offering is one of the most famous series of all time, Legend of the Galactic Heroes, or Log H for short. Based on a book series by Yoshiki Tanaka, it was adapted into 2 movies and a 110-episode OVA series from 1988 to 1997, with a 48-episode prequel series as well. Set about 1600 years in the future, mankind has by this point colonised much of the galaxy, and is now divided into 3 nations. On one side stands the Galactic Empire, founded nearly 500 years prior by Rudolf von Goldenbaum, who turned the old Galactic Republic into an absolute monarchy. Over the centuries, the Empire has become rotten. The 37th Kaiser and ruler at the start of the series, Friedrich IV, barely even seems to rule, and thus the nation is dominated by corrupt nobles who do as they please. On the other side are the Free Planets Alliance, born 300 years earlier from a band of rebels that broke away from the Empire and founded a republic based on what Rudolf had previously swept aside. However, their nation too is rotten to the core. Politicians at the top, most exemplified in the series by the powerful Secretary of Defense, Job Trunicht, feign patriotism, but in reality care more for their own careers, and will go as far as using vigilante groups to break any political opponents. A much smaller, but economically powerful, third power sits between them, the Dominion of Fazan. Originally founded by the Empire, it has effectively become an independent territory, and acts as a neutral go-between between the 2 powers. However, it has used this position to enrich itself, selling weapons to both sides, and has an interest in keeping the conflict going between them as long as possible. At the start of the series, the war between the Galactic Empire and the Free Planets Alliance, or FPA as I will call them for short from now on, has been raging for 150 years. Every major battle usually results in hundreds of thousands to millions of casualties on both sides, yet there seems to be no end in sight, since there is only one narrow passage of space, the Isilon Corridor, in which the 2 powers can actually fight one another, and neither can break through into the other's core territory, not least the FBA, who have to face the powerful Isilon Fortress blocking access to the Empire. The series focuses on the exploits of the 2 major heroes of this conflict, their various allies, and also their enemies, both internal and external. Reinhard von Lohengram is only 20 at the start of the series, and the son of an impoverished minor noble, yet now he is on the verge of becoming an Imperial Admiral, the highest rank in the military, for his various victories, which is unusual given the nature of the Empire. His ultimate goal is to overthrow the Goldenbaums, the nobles, and proclaim himself ruler of a reformed empire, and then conquer all of space. You can guess that his character draws a lot of influence from Alexander the Great, and of course, none other than Napoleon Bonaparte. Even a lot of his supporting admirals are based on Napoleon's marshals. His friend, Siegfried Kircheis, is modelled on Jean Lannes. The red-haired Admiral Bittenfeld, one of my favourite of the Imperial admirals, is based on Marshal Ney. He even has a Waterloo moment in one battle, which leads to Reinhardt adapting a quote from Napoleon. I'd even argue Oberstein, another of my favourite characters, is very much like Talleyrand, although I would also perhaps compare him more to someone like Thomas Cromwell in terms of his role in the plot. On the other side of the galaxy, the FBA's best commander is Yang Wen-li, a 29-year-old soldier who distinguished himself years earlier and became a national hero. However, unlike the ambitious Reinhardt, he never even wanted to be in the military in the first place, let alone conquer space, instead wishing to learn history. There are various parts of his character that draw from historical figures, but arguably Admiral Yi Sun-sin, who like Yang won a series of victories despite being heavily outnumbered, and was also harassed by jealous politicians at home. I won't spoil much more of the series since it has such a deep lore, hundreds of characters, and ranges from vast fleet battles involving millions of men to a few people talking about the state of the conflict and deep philosophical questions about what is the right way for mankind to be governed. If I were to try that, then I would be here for several hours. What Log H does much, much better than Mr. Scott in his Napoleon outing is how the characters are presented. And despite being a work of fiction, it is very authentic in that the characters are heavily based off real people. The series is effectively a history. You see the world from all perspectives, and it is hard to judge which side you would be with. Both sides have just figures. Both have cruel and corrupt figures. Some are a mess of contradictions. Lang, the chief of the secret police in the Empire, seems to be cruel and evil when dealing with his enemies, but to his family, he's apparently a loving and kind individual. Men like Labello, who at the start is a just and fair political figure in the FBA who wants to clean out the corruption there, starts to evolve as the series goes on, becoming more and more unhinged and making terrible, almost evil decisions. This nuance would be good on something like Napoleon, where he has to make difficult choices and question if he's taking the right ones, or the nature of his legacy. In Log H, Reinhard is determined not to fall into the same pitfalls that Rudolf did all those centuries ago, but as the series goes on, he has to make choices that cause misery for many, probably the most pivotal being whether to stop a nuclear attack on the planet of Westland by his noble enemies in the Empire. Stopping it would save 2 million innocent people. Letting it happen would enable him to present his enemies as evil and give him a massive propaganda victory, enabling him to end the conflict quickly and save more lives in the long run. Napoleon was more self-confident than somebody like Reinhard, and didn't have to worry about nuclear weapons of course, but even he grappled with how to establish a legacy, hence why he divorced Josephine and married Marie-Louise, so he could found a dynasty that would last the ages. Appearance-wise, the series is also authentic with this setting. The FPA look very modern, its military wear green uniforms and berets, not too dissimilar to many modern militaries like that of the USA. Meanwhile, the Germanic-inspired Galactic Empire has black uniforms, and the ability to dress up with pomp and ceremony, like the aristocrats of old. The main imperial palace is even called Neue Sanssouci, after the famous Prussian palace. These elements really help you believe that you are watching history, rather than the work of fiction it is, make it seem all the more real. It might be unfair to compare a near 45-hour series to a 2.5-hour movie, but you can still have hit some of those basic beats in your own grand epic, Mr. Scott. But alas, he did not. And now, another episode of Tai Dobhid, or possibly the first appearance, depending on whether I get Tudor Rant 5 done in time. If the latter is the case, then it stands for Terrible Arguments in Defence of Bad History and Dramas, which I was initially just going to keep for the Tudor stuff, but this movie definitely needs a segment as well. Let us begin. But the extended edition will fix everything. The movie will be a masterpiece. Will it? Will it really? At the time of recording, there has been no news on when it will be out. Personally, due to Scott's other projects and his age, I doubt it will see the light of day. Theoretically, even if it does though, I cannot see it doing so. We will still be left with the poor decision to focus most of the film on Josephine, and Scott has confirmed that it would have way more of her in there. Marengo would probably be the only new battle scene we would be getting. We would still be missing important ones like Leipzig and the entire First Italian campaign. The only other major new scenes I can see from the behind the scenes would be things like the attempted assassination and maybe some more with Napoleon's illness at Waterloo, which was apparently cut from the theatrical. None of that will save the picture. Finally, the film should have been able to somewhat stand up on its own merits, and not rely on an additional extended cut to fix it. The Lord of the Rings theatricals, for example, are still brilliant, and the extended editions expanded them. They were not there to cover up errors. The Thing that happened caused issues. You know the one I'm talking about. Yes, The Thing did impact filming, but it does seem that it has rather become akin to a child going to their teachers and saying, "The dog ate my homework" at this point. In spite of all the difficulties, you still had more than enough extras and special effects to make this film work. Oppenheimer was filmed at roughly the same time as Napoleon, admittedly in America, which follows different rules, but was also subject to some event restrictions. It even had a lower budget than Napoleon, yet managed to become one of the highest grossing films of that year. Also, many, if not most, of the script and directional choices were made by Scott without The Thing clouding his mind. I mean, did The Thing force him to dig a load of trenches for Waterloo? Did The Thing force him to make Napoleon die in the most pathetic way possible? The period is too big, they had to cut things out. Obviously, a 2.5-hour movie will never get everything in there, but that doesn't become a blanket excuse to ignore basically all of it. You have such a wealth of material to draw from, yet you basically used none of it. La Révolution Française had to cut lots of things out. The War in the Vendée goes virtually unmentioned, for example, but the product kept enough of the core story there, so you, the audience, got a good understanding of what was going on. And, returning from the previous Tai Dobhid, or again its first appearance, depending on timing, we have It's a Movie. If you don't like it, go watch the documentary. My god, you wouldn't believe the amount of "It's a movie, bro" comments I collected for just this segment. Here is a selection.
Historical accuracy is for effing losers. Ridley Scott is an artist, and the emotional truth of his films matters more than distortion.
Oh, shut up.
Shooting cannons at the pyramids will look cool on camera and instantly convey Egypt being conquered to the audience. Sorry, I don't make the rules.
If the pinnacle of cool UU is some circles touching some triangles, you're a lost cause.
I know it's popular right now to dunk on Ridley Scott for his Napoleon movie, but I think it's very funny how he doesn't give a shit. He made the movie he wanted regardless of historical accuracy just to f with historians and critics probably.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Hashtag Napoleon was decent. Everyone getting head up because it isn't historically accurate needs to calm the F down. It's a Ridley Scott film, not a documentary. It's a good time.
I think you guys are an echo chamber who just agree with what is written online. I just saw the film and enjoyed it. The pacing was good. I wasn't bored at any point.
Cause we're boring!
Who cares? It's entertainment. What is wrong with these PPL?
ITD Entertainment, not a documentary made by the guy behind Aliens. Anyone wanna fact check Prometheus?
How did you know were you there?
Generally, who cares?
I do. Next.
We do!
That's because I mentioned the film being good on all fronts. If you set aside your preconceived notions of Napoleon, you'll find a consistently portrayed personality in the movie. A logical and acceptable dramatization of the ups and downs of a person. However, if you hold on to your own preconceived image of Napoleon's personality, then, of course, it might be challenging to sympathize with the character. ごめん、思わず突っ込んじゃったけど、ちょっと理解が。
I am just in love with this movie. The simplicity of Joaquin Phoenix, never easily offended.
You think you're so great because you have boats!
Magnanimous and fun in private. Very cold in battles, attacking symbols of power. Pyramids, throne of Russia full of pigeons, Esset. This army which passes under the ice. It's a effing masterpiece. Digest it and stop to cry. It deserves a second view. It will age well and it's not the director cut yet. The problem is just that it was too short.
Okay, how many of you legit thought Ridley Scott's Napoleon was gonna be a strict by the book biopic? That's dumb. Do you know how incredibly boring that man's history actually is?
We're so boring!
I mean, it's fascinating if you're a history person like me, but it would make a bad 4-part movie.
The more I think about it, if million-year-old Ridley Scott wants to make a 160-minute movie about the whole life of Napoleon, the fact that the biggest set pieces in the film are mostly mythical retellings of what happened is fine. If it pees off historians, they can eat acid.
Silence.
Wada Ridley Scott isn't shooting Austerlitz accurately. Yeah, well, Kevin, your mom believes computer chips get into your blood through vaccines. The Napoleon movie isn't breaking anything that ain't already broke.
Whoops, there it goes! Yep, my brain stopped.
Listen, buddy, the American movie audience doesn't have the background to understand his tactical brilliance. All we want to get out of this movie is literally me and retaking the Napoleon complex meme.
Brilliant! I have absolutely no idea what's going on.
The moment they announced a Ridley Scott Napoleon film starring Joaquin, I was on board no matter what. Brutally accurate master and commander style war movie. Hyper-stylized gladiator type action. Screwball comedy. I will slop up whatever they give me.
Lovely filth down here!
It's a movie, not a documentary.
So, what's your argument? It's not fiction either.
It only claims to be a movie, and that's all it is.
But what does that even mean?
Get laid.
Genuinely, if you think this, your brain has melted into liquid and dribbled out of your ears. The movie is called Napoleon. It is about a guy called Napoleon. It purports to be set during the life of Napoleon. Being in the medium of film does not give it a blanket excuse to do nothing to show who this Napoleon fellow was. I did not want to watch a documentary. I wanted to see a film showing these events on the big screen, and was left sorely disappointed. Just because you lack the mental capacity to absorb information does not mean other people are incapable of doing so. To conclude this section of the review then, we got some very nice looking costumes, but other than that, the rest of the authenticity was about as sludgy and shoddy as the rest of Mr. Scott's work.
The essence of drama is conflict. That's why they gave me this taser.
One of the main defences for this film being inaccurate, as we discussed earlier, was that pesky history thing. It was so dull and boring that changing it would obviously make the drama much better. Except it did not. As we covered in the character section, the acting in this is pretty terrible. Joaquin Phoenix was horrendously miscast as Napoleon. If this had been made, say, 20 years ago when he was a young man, and if the director was invested in the character, then something good may have come out of this. But we are dealing with hypotheticals that will never happen. What we do have is that Napoleon is portrayed as a middle-aged, bored, childish blusterer who, if I had to follow into battle, would make me want to desert at the earliest opportunity.
Where'd everybody go? Hello?
We have gone into this earlier, but it bears repeating. Joaquin Phoenix is terrible in the role. He had absolutely no passion, and I half wonder if he only agreed to do it as a favour for his old friend Ridley Scott. Even if we take the historical aspects out of this, it is just a bad performance overall, with no sense as to what his character even is. He occasionally spouts lofty plans and dreams, but it is difficult to see what they really are, or what their purpose is other than vague notions of glory. We have no idea why he went from rejecting the crown to making his own imperial one. We barely see any of his battles, so we have no idea how he is such a feared military genius, and the ones we do see are comical in their tactics. I was half expecting to see the Tsar of Russia fall off a cliff like Wile E. Coyote in one of his desperate attempts to stop Roadrunner Napoleon. Obviously, Vanessa Kirby was the best performer in this, but that is like saying you are the best violinist in the band of the RMS Titanic. She kind of turns up, does whatever she can with the sludge in front of her, becomes irrelevant to the plot in the last third, and then lingers on till near the end. There were plenty of other good actors in this film, but they're all pretty much wasted. Paul Rees was a decent attempt at Talleyrand, but he has about 3 proper scenes in the whole movie, before disappearing past the halfway point, save for his brief cameo at the Congress towards the end. The Tsar was decent and probably should have been set up more, since Russia was one of the major powers that helped bring Napoleon down, but alas, it was not to be. Pacing-wise, the movie is an utter mess. We barely get an introduction to the revolution and the events of the era, and, other than the text blurb and Marie Antoinette hiding in a closet and getting her head chopped off, we, the audience, have very little idea what is at stake. And then the movie started, and it only got worse. To best sum up the plot, we get constant scenes of Napoleon and Josephine, interrupted by some occasional pesky scenes like important battles and stuff. None of the pesky scenes are really set up or established. We have very little idea as to why Napoleon here is suddenly signing a treaty with the Tsar, when, a bit over 15 minutes earlier in the movie, he was fighting his armies, and the Tsar was apparently not going to surrender at that point. Of course, that is because we missed the whole 1806 and 1807 campaigns, but we went into that earlier in some capacity. Not that it matters, because 5 minutes later, he's invading Russia now. Why does Napoleon make half the decisions he does in the film? We don't know most of the time. He just sort of bumbles from one scene to another, spouting odd lines about boats and food that make me cringe every time I hear them.
You think you're so great because you have boats!
The cinematography. Oh boy, I've waited to rant about this. For many years now, a common complaint about many films and series is that they are often quite bluey greyish looking and, like Homer Simpson chasing that pig, I felt people were being too harsh. And it was just a little blue. It's still good. It's just a creative decision in movies. Napoleon, though, has flown out of the dam into the sky, and convinced me that the colours blue and grey must be banned if I ever gain political power. Apologies, American Civil War reenactors. This was an era with vibrant coloured uniforms that made sure each nation's troops were instantly recognisable on the battlefield. You could tell who the British were, since most of their regiments wore red. Most of the French wore blue. The Russians were usually in green, and so on. With this damned blue and grey filter, though, you only get one colour.
Wow, look at all these colours. Dark grey, light grey, and a sort of medium grey.
In the behind the scenes, you can see the uniforms in their full glory, which makes it all the more tragic when you put them next to how they were washed out in the film. Again, just look at La Révolution Française and how they used, light in certain scenes to make things look better, like the scene with the tennis court oath, or the sun shining through the smoke during the storming of the Tuileries Palace. There are grey-looking moments where suitable, like Valmy for example, but that is not the entire movie. If both films were as washed out as Napoleon, then it would not have looked half as impressive.
You guys all think you're so much better than me!
Oh, Meg, that is the least fancy thing I have ever heard.
Now, we have already had the Cavalier Recommends a Random Anime section, But I'd thought I should bring up another example of something being faithful to its source material as a comparison to the unfaithful Napoleon. Whilst I would love to bring in La Révolution Française and its accuracy again, or Log H and the books it is based on, I have already talked about them in some depth. So what I'm going to do is completely out of left field, and bring in a work of fiction not related to history in any way, which will fit in well with this section of the review. And that is the adaptations of the Chronicles of Narnia by the BBC, primarily the last one, The Silver Chair, which is the one I feel that gets left out the most. This was a series produced by the BBC, adapting the famous books by C.S. Lewis, starting with The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe in 1988, followed by adaptations of Prince Caspian and the Voyage of the Dawn Treader in 1989, and finally The Silver Chair in 1990. Sadly, the series, and its effects, have aged rather badly, and even at the time they were noted as having problems, to the point that you can't help but laugh with some of the shots, like the clips of Warwick Davis sounding like he had slowly suffocated to death in a large owl costume. It should be noted that these were the first British children's television programmes to feature extensive use of blue screen and special effects, which arguably helped pave the way for what we have now, for better or worse. In the same way, the Wright brothers would hardly be expected to keep up with a fighter jet. Anyway, I am getting sidetracked. The Silver Chair is focused on Eustace Scrubb, cousin of the Pevensey children from the previous stories, returning to Narnia with a school friend, Jill Pole, in a quest to find Prince Rilian, the lost son of King Caspian. Along the way, they also meet Puddleglum, a rather on-the-face-of-it pessimistic marshwiggle played by... and with him as their guide, they journey north, facing many a hardship along the way. Now, the budget for The Silver Chair alone was £2 million at the time, or roughly $5.5 million today, adjusted for inflation, which was large for a British production, although cheap compared to what an American company could muster, I'm sure. In spite of the budget, sadly, it was nowhere near enough to accurately model the whole look of Narnia. For example, Jill and Eustace switched to these Narnian clothes early on, and wear them for the rest of the series, whereas in the book, they briefly wear Narnian clothes in Cair Paravel, before wearing a mixture of their old clothes with some Narnian additions on their journey north, and then finally, they get some much fancier clothes when they reach Harfang, which Puddleglum points out makes them stand out when they are trying to get away. This, naturally, meant that the series wasn't going to succeed on its effects and costumes, meaning that, to compensate, the story had to be engaging to say the least. To its credit, the series is extremely faithful to the book. Very little dialogue is added, or changed from the original, and what little is different, for the most part, is made to enhance the story, and keep with what was already established in the lore. For example, one of my favourite scenes in this adaptation, in fact in the whole of the Narnia series, is when the characters are all being bewitched by the Lady of the Green Kirtle, the main antagonist, into thinking Narnia isn't real, and the horrible world she has created miles underground is their only home. To which Puddleglum gives this speech that I will try to include here, dependent on copyright from my old nemesis, the British Broadcasting Corporation.
Madam, there is one thing to say. Suppose we have only made up these things, like sun, sky, stars, and moon, and Aslan himself. In that case, it seems to me that the made-up things are a good deal better than the real ones. And if this black pit of a kingdom is the best you can make, then it's a poor world. And we four can make a dream world to lick your real one hollow.
Aside from the famous speech, there is a scene in the previous episode that was actually not quite in the book, but, as per my earlier point, enhances Puddleglum's noble character. As mentioned, he appears pessimistic to the point of paranoia and wants to avoid danger, but when push comes to shove, he will prove himself braver than most. When the party first meet the masked stranger, again, the dialogue is virtually identical to the book, although he is much more friendly on paper. However, on the screen, the stranger is portrayed to be much more aggressive to increase tension, and seems to be about to actually kill Eustace for insulting the Lady of the Green Kirtle. Puddleglum, though, intervenes, and when the stranger says you will die in his place, he says,
Not especially, but if it's a choice between me and a child, you better kill me.
This is an added scene, but it fits his character well, since we've already seen that, whilst he moans and grumbles, he actually has a lot of compassion for his young companions, and having him willing to die instead of Eustace was a change that fits in with the established material. I would also say that the two child actors, David Thwaites as Eustace and Camilla Power as Jill, are very good and were well cast. Perhaps slightly older than their book counterparts, although this is apparently done so they could work longer hours, but they were at least only off by a couple of years, not decades. Probably one of the best examples of their performance is the scene where they are trapped underground, and Jill has what can be best described as a panic attack, since she hates being enclosed in dark places.
I can't go into there and I won't!
You must follow the others!
She hates being in dark, closed up spaces like this.
You must go on.
You can really feel the absolute panic in her voice. At least when they're on the lake, she didn't start moaning about boats.
You think you're so great because you have boats!
Of course, we do get some epic chewing of the scenery from Barbara Kellerman.
How dare you threaten me!
I literally chewed the scenery.
Yeah, perhaps that can be in the hasn't aged well category. And there were a few changes, particularly in regards to costumes in some scenes that were probably affected by the budget, as previously mentioned. But it goes to prove that, even if you have a tiny budget, as long as you are faithful to your source, and the changes you make are in keeping with the spirit of the work, then you can have a decent adaptation on your hands that will be beloved by many. If only the BBC had the hundreds of millions that Mr. Scott had. Hell, let us play a game. What if Ridley Scott had to adapt the Chronicles of Narnia, and decided to fit all 7 books into one movie, like he did with The Life of Napoleon? It would go a little something like this. We open with Aslan making Narnia, before moving swiftly on to see Lucy Pevensey walk into a wardrobe, where she meets Mr. Tumnus. Mr. Tumnus is played by Joaquin Phoenix, who will constantly flip between looking depressed, bored, and near suicidal throughout the film. Despite being only in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, Mr. Scott decides that Tumnus's friendship with Lucy is more important than the rest of all the other events in Narnia put together, so the fawn is going to be in the whole film, despite being long dead by the events of Prince Caspian. Also, we don't have time to introduce the other Pevensies properly, so they will just be cameos. After returning to Narnia, Lucy boards the Dawn Treader with Mr. Tumnus and Pevensey siblings 1, 2 and 3 to destroy the Silver Chair, so that they can free Prince Caspian from the perpetual winter caused by, I don't know, the White Witch of the Green Kirtle. And then there's a magician's nephew and something about a horse and his boy in there somewhere as well. I don't know, I'm not a novelist. Towards the end, Eustace Scrubb and Jill Pole randomly appear, and do some stuff, I guess. In the last battle, all the kids are fighting the White Witch's forces, where Lucy bravely rides into the fight with a giant warhammer, slaying multiple baddies. Did this happen in any of the books? Well, were you there to see Lucy not decapitate a Minotaur, and then smash her way through 7 ranks of enemy dwarves? I thought not. At the end, Mr. Tumnus has died of cancer, or something, and we cut to the Friends of Narnia at the end of the last battle in Narnia Plus, after the old Narnia got destroyed, for some reason. We end on Lucy flopping over from a heart attack dead, as the ghost of Mr. Tumnus says, "Let's try this again, except this time, you be the fawn." Ridley, call me if you need a new scriptwriter. Moving on, a brief note on the music used in the film. It isn't the worst soundtrack in the world, and some of it is fine in a bland sort of way, but nothing really sticks out. I guess the music during the scene when the cannons open fire on the ice was my favourite piece of the soundtrack, but other than that, I cannot really name anything that I would call memorable. Hell, a lot of it is not original, but is instead reused from other works. Right at the beginning, during the execution of Marie Antoinette, a rendition of the revolutionary song Ah Ça Ira plays. Side note here, a missed opportunity to have La Carmagnole playing, which is actually about Marie Antoinette, but the thing is they actually do use it later in the film, when the imprisoned aristocrats are being freed. When Ah Ça Ira, a song about hanging aristocrats, would have fit much better there, but hey-ho, what do I know? I wasn't there.
How did you know? Were you there?
I thought I recognised this particular rendition of Ah Ça Ira though, and lo and behold, it was the well-known version performed by Edith Piaf in the 50s. Why didn't you just record your own version? At least that sounded appropriate though. Meanwhile, at Waterloo, you have what sounds more like Mongolian throat singing to announce that Napoleon is going on his silly kamikaze charge. I will actually refer back to Log H here again for a moment. One way the series is made timeless is by its soundtrack, and, ironically, it does the thing I was just complaining about, but in a way that succeeds. Most of its score is made up of the works of various classical composers, but the pieces used fit the theme of the series very well, in that it is a history of this conflict in space, with the soundtrack choices making it feel more timeless. In recent years, they did a remake called The New Thesis, and opted to use original music rather than the classical music of the old OVA, but none of it really worked in the same way as it did in the past. As an example, in the first episode of the OVA, the Imperial fleet under Reinhardt launches an attack on the Alliance's 4th Fleet, and during the battle, extracts from Gustav Mahler's Symphony No. 2 play, which fit it very well. Again, I will try and play a clip here and see if I can get it past copyright. Even the original compositions feel timeless. Valkyrie Ha is mentioned in the book as being a patriotic song for the Empire, played at Reinhardt's promotion ceremony. For the series, we got to hear a lovely melody that swells and, forgive me for using very flowery language here, emits pride and glory with every note, perfect for the Empire. It is also used throughout the series to great effect, most notably at the end of the Battle of Amritsar, when Kirkais breaks through the minefield, as all of them explode almost in beat with the music, as the Empire wins one of its greatest victories in the series. Napoleon, sadly, whilst actually being set in an era where half of these great composers came from, did little to try and emulate that, other than copying a few revolutionary songs and then putting them in the wrong place in the movie.
I'm playing all the right notes, but not necessarily in the right order.
In finishing up this section, I hope I've demonstrated to you just how bad this film was on the dramatic front. You were never going to save this production with appalling dialogue, lethargic acting, and music so out of place you would be forgiven, coupled with the silly scenes, into thinking this was a comedy.
Come on. Come on, baby, I just want out.
I wish you could put me on your knee and take care of me.
Oh! Whoa! That's a nasty glug!
This here is a special exclusive section, just for this review. You see, back in late August, I was feeling pretty confident. Despite numerous delays and real-life events getting in the way, my Magnus Opus was nearing completion. I even started to do a bit more gardening again, since I felt I could relax. Not that it relaxes me, but I have to do it. But then, a noise was heard in the distance. As it got nearer, it became clear what it was. Clown music. And upon a cycle, there stood Ridley Scott, who, out of nowhere, dropped his oversized trousers, honked his nose, and delivered this.
Hello, people of the internet. This is Ridley Scott speaking. I'm thrilled to announce that Napoleon, the director's cut, is now exclusively on Apple TV+.
Oh, man. Oh, God. Oh, man.
This came as a surprise to most, since the news had basically been that this director's cut would never see the light of day, and even its release was like a parent abandoning an unwanted child. The trailer was released the same day as the director's cut. There was no build-up, and the only leak we had was a report stating that it had been submitted for rating. That was it. Why it was released now will remain a mystery. Fortunately, as you heard, I had sort of accounted for this in the intro. But once I actually watched the damn thing, I knew I had to at least somewhat cover it. Rather than starting from scratch, though, I kept the stuff you have just watched, but will now use this one-off section to specifically go through what was added in the director's cut, and whether it improved the movie. Keep in mind my predictions from the Tai Dobhid segment. The director's cut is 48 minutes longer than the theatrical, and boy do you feel every excruciating second of it. When watching it, I initially thought about half of the 48 minutes were just extra shots of things like people firing muskets and so on. I was curious though, and being a complete masochist, I put both versions into the timeline next to each other so I could pick out the scenes that were actually added. To my surprise, there were actually none that were additional bits like I thought. I could have sworn there was a new added shot or two here with Marie Antoinette's execution, but no. Taking out the opening logos, the first new scene doesn't appear until 15.5 minutes into the movie, not counting a little bit of changed dialogue. Going further, I then went full investigation mode, and drew up a spreadsheet detailing what scenes were added, what length they were, and so on. I have not been thorough though, and of course it is more like new sequences, since, for example, this one here has about 3 different new scenes that come one after the other, and I have been a bit lax in how I differentiate new scene and extended scene. Broadly though, taking away any new logos and bits in the end credits, we get just over 47 minutes of new footage. Nearly 19 minutes of this is in the first hour. The second hour has nearly 13.5, the third hour nearly 13 minutes, and the last half hour has barely 2. The longest new scene is nearly 6 minutes long, the shortest is barely 15 seconds. There is only one alternate angle used in the movie, right at the end, where some British troops are observing Napoleon on St Helena. As you can see, the first hour is the one that got more attention. I also colour-coded the scenes, so light orange is new Josephine scenes with her and no Napoleon. Light blue means Napoleon with no Josephine, and purple is scenes with both of them. White ones are scenes with neither. The first hour's scenes are definitely more focused towards Josephine. The longest scene is mainly focused on her, save for one bit which we will get onto later. And even Napoleon scenes here aren't that long, including the shortest 15-second one. By the middle of the film, it is getting more focused on Napoleon, and then, once he divorces her, it's more Napoleon again. But that can be deceiving, since the only really lengthy new sequences here are in Russia. In an interview, Ridley Scott said the director's cut would have way more Josephine, and he wasn't lying. Austerlitz and Waterloo get basically no new scenes. I will now briefly go over what was added, although I am afraid this will take a while. The first sequence is the longest scene, where Hortense is being interrogated about her family, just after her father's arrest, since they want to arrest Josephine here as well. A side note, after the interrogator threatens to hurt Hortense, Josephine says,
"So she is 5 years old."
Which she isn't. She's about 10. In fact, really, she should be nearer 11, since it was March 1794 when her father was arrested, not September 1793, which is a month before Marie Antoinette is executed, and 3 before the Toulon scenes, meaning we have been doing a bit of time travelling. What is it with getting basic facts wrong like this? Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to go into so much detail there. Then, Josephine in prison. She's shown around, told she should cut her hair short so it doesn't mess with the blade of the guillotine, and also that she should try to get pregnant to postpone her potential execution. Then, a brief scene of the Carmelite nuns being executed. Again though, this event was in July, not April. Next, Robespierre's execution is actually shown. Then a much extended sequence of Josephine leaving prison after avoiding the guillotine route. Walking home very slowly, and reuniting with her children, before back to Napoleon and Junot deciding to go to the survivors' ball, which now includes the most annoying sound ever heard by human ears.
Holy Jesus! What is that?
I was forever trapped in an infinite timeline of pain and suffering. I envy death.
Barras now gets a scene with Josephine, where we actually learn she was having an affair with him, as historically happened, and that he encouraged her to get with Napoleon. An extended scene of Napoleon waiting around Josephine's house. Deveau is introduced a bit earlier, singing Le Chant du Départ. Napoleon's conquest of Italy is now ever so briefly shown, but it's just him riding through Milan. Side note here, I think they CGI'd the backgrounds a bit differently, as this shot was in the trailer, and it's clearly a battle scene, but hey-ho. He then goes into a cathedral, and tells the local bishop he is nicking all of the artwork. There is an extended scene from the theatrical of Napoleon and Josephine in bed, before he leaves for Egypt. Not one, but 2 new extra scenes of Josephine's affair with Hippolyte Charles. The 15-second shot when Napoleon arrives back in France from Egypt, Napoleon apologising to Josephine's maid after he threw a tray out of her hand, and then he is comforted by her. Hour 2 has some more scenes of the planning for the Brumaire coup. A brief scene of Napoleon as first consul deciding on new uniforms and signing decrees. A slightly extended scene of Napoleon and Josephine at a reception. The Battle of Marengo. Oh, I can't wait to rant about that one. The attempted assassination of Napoleon, and then the execution of the Duc d'Anjou. Just to state here, whilst it was good to have this scene, instead of just having a bomb go off, we have a hilarious sequence where a flaming wagon is driven right into Napoleon's carriage. That no one noticed until it was right there. Oh, and D'Anjou quotes Ney commanding his own firing squad for some reason. Despite this, it was at least a scene that should have been left in. However, from this point on is where the additional scenes really start to go off the rails. We have a scene after Napoleon becomes emperor where he meets with Hippolyte Charles, Josephine's former lover, and asks how he can pleasure her to get a son. And then the only additional Austerlitz scene is Napoleon sitting on the loo, then washing his face, and then getting an aide to rub him down like a horse whilst his soldiers sit in a barn.
Harder. Like a horse.
Didn't that movie used to have a war in it?
Come on, yep, you've been warned.
Hour 3 continues with the last of the new Josephine scenes, where Eugène reads out the divorce terms to her. Tsar Alexander I and one of his ministers discuss leaving the continental system. Napoleon's troops, on the way to Moscow, find a sleigh. It is really important they set up that they found a sleigh. Napoleon, on the way back from Russia, is told he has piles. The second longest news scene involves Caulaincourt urging Napoleon to leave the army in the ever so important sleigh from earlier, which he does, with just 2 guards. Meanwhile, the soldiers have all crammed into a barn to escape the cold, but a random bit of fire that was just burning on the straw here, not even on a hearth or anything, catches something else on fire. I think maybe some gunpowder spreads it, and the whole barn ignites like it is covered in petrol. Meanwhile, grumpy Napoleon is doing his best impression of downfall.
This is a triumphant return. I am the victor.
Mit dem Angriff Steiners wird das alles in Ordnung kommen.
And rides over the Borodino battlefield. 2 new and extended scenes on Elba, with a local boy shining his boots, Napoleon getting even more angry over Josephine seeing the Tsar, and Napoleon's mother saying he looks a bit sad. A brief scene of Louis XVIII fleeing Paris, getting even further humiliated than the theatrical.
Perhaps the people will let me go as they let him come.
Majesty.
Oh, I wish that scary-looking clown at the end of my bed would go away.
Napoleon lying in Josephine's bed after her death, and then, the only new scene for Waterloo, in the theme of Austerlitz, is Napoleon looking into the toilet at his bloody piles. The last half an hour only has a slightly longer conversation between Wellington and Napoleon, and then Napoleon showing Betsy Balcom on St. Helena how to hold a sword. Apologies for exhausting everyone's attention, but I thought I'd better lay out just what was added, and how pointless most of it all is. Of these scenes, I would say about 4 or 5 add to the film. Number 1, the Carmelite nun's execution. Whilst I would actually cut out the Josephine stuff and introduce her like she is in the theatrical, perhaps keeping her reuniting with the children, although props to the young actress playing Hortense 1, who actually got some lines compared to the theatrical, the scene of the nuns being guillotined is one that should have been left in. Historically, this particular group of nuns from Compiègne were executed in July of 1794, and, as they waited their turn, they all chanted in Latin. Each time the blade fell, the crowd grew less and less vocal until, when the last one's head had fallen, they were dead silent, shocked at what they had just witnessed, as is shown in the film.
Hans, are we the baddies?
It was not the only event, but it was one that certainly made it apparent to many that the terror had gone too far, and it contributed to Robespierre's downfall weeks later. In the theatrical, we go straight from Napoleon winning at Toulon to Barras just telling him people are no longer supporting the terror. Here, we actually get to see it. There are some finer details that are wrong. The last nun being executed looks like she is little more than a teenager, when the youngest was in her mid-20s. Some errors with the guillotine and so on, but the gist of it is there. And the young actress here, played by... oh, wait, I don't know who it is. I just grab a dice here. Number 3, Ania Marson, does a decent job of showing bravery, whilst also showing some glimpses of fear when she presumably glances up at the blade. She certainly shows more emotion than Joaquin Phoenix.
You think you're so great because you have boats!
Number 2, Josephine and Barras' affair. This should have been left in, since it establishes just why Josephine went for Napoleon. Historically, Barras wanted to make a connection with Bonaparte, whilst also fobbing off an expensive mistress. Without this scene, we just assume that Josephine likes him, I guess? Which wasn't quite true at this stage. Number 3, the planning for the Brumaire coup. In the theatrical, we go from Sieyès talking with Napoleon about how they're going to launch a coup to overthrow the Directory, straight to said coup. Here, we get 2 new scenes where Sieyès is in the room with the plotters, where they go into a bit more detail regarding how the events will play out. Then, a scene that night where Lucien and Napoleon basically agree that the latter is merely using the other plotters to gain power for himself, before, finally, he tells Josephine that, by tomorrow, he will be first consul. Whilst the last bit with Lucien and Josephine had some bad dialogue choices, overall, this was a good change that further fleshes out exactly how Napoleon took over, and this should definitely have been left in the theatrical. Perhaps a bit less of the why is here, since, of course, Mr. Scott has decided to focus the movie on Josephine rather than Napoleon, but this is a part that should definitely have been left in. Number 4, the assassination attempt and the execution of the Duc d'Enghien. A quick note here. These 2 events happened quite a few years apart. The plot of the Rue Saint-Nicaise, depicted here, happened in December 1800, whereas the Duc d'Enghien was executed in March 1804 for a separate conspiracy. However, given the other mistakes of the film, this is low down the list, since at least we get the important point of royalists are trying to kill Napoleon, and Enghien gets executed as a result. In the same way that Cromwell, just having Parliament get recalled, rather than depicting the short and long parliaments, is fine, given that it only had a couple of hours to show the whole of the English Civil War. As mentioned earlier, despite the comical version of the Machine Infernale, this event, and Enghien's execution, should definitely have been shown. His effective kidnapping and murder from a neutral country shocked Europe. It was a factor that led to the formation of the Third Coalition against France, and the event made Napoleon seem tyrannical. Even if Napoleon tried to make peace after this, the event had already sealed his reputation amongst many of the crowned heads of Europe for years to come. Number 5. Tsar Alexander I and a minister discuss leaving the continental system. In the theatrical, we go straight from Josephine seeing Napoleon's son to the Emperor suddenly declaring, "I now have to invade Russia because something about Russia not trading with us." Here, we do actually get to see a scene where the Tsar is in discussion with one of his ministers, who I do not think gets a name or credit, but at least toothless female warden did though. Let's just call this fellow Bob. Interestingly, pretty much all of the movie is in English, save for one scene where Talleyrand briefly speaks in German with the Austrian ambassador, and then this scene, which is entirely in Russian. Bob tells the Tsar that what is good for Napoleon cannot be good for Russia, and that trade with Britain is necessary to make Russia great. Bob also tells Alexander that his father made a serious error by putting himself above Russia, and he does not want to see the Tsar becoming unpopular. Alexander responds that he is not his father, and tells Bob never to make that mistake again. He then says he will realign with the British, and that he is not afraid of Napoleon. Next to the Carmelite scene, this is probably one of the most necessary that should have been left in. Firstly, we actually get the justification for why Russia leaves the continental system, and why Napoleon thus invades. Without it, we just cut from Josephine to the invasion as stated before. Secondly, we also get to look at the Tsar's character further. His father, Tsar Paul, was overthrown and murdered in a palace coup. Here, we see his fear that if he fails in his duty to his people, a similar fate might await him. hence why he has to prove himself, and standing up to Napoleon seems like a good way of doing so. As stated earlier, I do think the actor playing the Tsar was quite decently cast, so at least we got a bit more of him and less of wheezing and croaking Joaquin Phoenix, who seemed to have the energy of Torgo.
I'll get the luggage.
Well, that is it. Every other scene should have either been heavily redone or left on the cutting room floor completely. The battles are not extended, save for Austerlitz and Waterloo, both having new sequences of Napoleon on the loo. Why? The only new battle is Marengo, and it is a complete joke. We get a map scene where Deveau and others tell Napoleon where the Allied armies are, apparently including a French royalist army somewhere around Brittany and the Vendée, even though Napoleon had long since made a ceasefire with the remnants of those forces, most of which had been crushed several years earlier. All we see of the actual Battle of Marengo is the scene from the trailer, except it is flipped the right way now, with the addition of an Austrian grenadier getting his head cut off by Napoleon's sword. That's it. You might as well have just cut the scene completely, since it basically serves no purpose. No one mentions the importance of the victory, and it is never brought up again. Hell, Waterloo mentioned Marengo more.
Everything depends on one big battle, just like at Marengo. But at Marengo, I was young.
I've been in this position before at the Battle of Marengo. I lost the battle at 5 o'clock, but I won it back again at 7!
And then the sheer amount of scenes related to Josephine. The chart can be deceiving, since, even though we start to get more Napoleon scenes as the movie progresses, some of them are still related to her. The worst has to be when Napoleon meets with Hippolyte Charles, and asks how he can get his wife pregnant.
I need to think.
Yes, I suppose you'll have to do the thinking for both of us now, darling.
It is such a long and unnecessary scene. We could have had the Battle of Vienna, but instead we got that. We could have had Eylau, but instead we got Napoleon mumbling in a sleigh. We could have had Leipzig, but instead we got Napoleon giving Betsy Balcom some fencing techniques. Oh, and we got some new additions to the cringe dialogue section.
He's a filthy bourbon weasel who will be punished.
I wish you could put me on your knee and take care of me.
Overall, there is not much more to say. A few bits of music are changed, the occasional bit of narration and costumes look okay, but the criticisms of the theatrical still stand. This cut most certainly did not save the film. Interestingly, there may have been even more stuff that was left out. In interviews, just as filming was about to start, Scott said the film was meant to begin with a young Napoleon having a snowball fight at the military academy, but whether this was filmed or ditched early, we do not know. During filming, when the cast wasn't yet fully known, a young actress named Thea Achillea was listed on the IMDb as playing Napoleon's daughter, although this has since been removed. However, a bit of digging does turn up some images of her in costume, suggesting there was going to be a plotline about him having an illegitimate daughter or something. Of course, he probably didn't have one, so who knows where that was going to go. There may also have been a few extra sequences since, during filming for the Russian campaign, you can see the men standing with their muskets out, like the column is under attack, whilst Napoleon rides along. Other than that, this is probably all we were going to get, and boy was it a disaster. In conclusion, this is one of the most disappointing historical movies I have ever seen. The acting was terrible, the pacing was rushed, the dialogue was horrible, and, despite nice-looking uniforms, I thought I'd developed cataracts due to how washed out and grey the colour grading was. This movie, and why it ended up the way it is, reminds me of the Tenerife airport disaster. If but one factor had been different, the whole disaster may well have been avoided, and it feels the same here. If only Ridley Scott had read a history book. If only David Scarpa learned how to write. If only the historical advisors had been allowed to teach Ridley Scott history, then something may have changed, and at least given us a part of this film we could have enjoyed, outside of some uniforms, but alas it was not to be. I would make a joke here imagining if Ridley Scott decided to do a Henry VIII movie, but we've already had the Spanish Princess TV series from Starz, so I can well imagine what it would look like. As we just saw, the extended edition certainly did not save the film, save for a couple of scenes that should have been in the theatrical. In fact, it just further highlighted how bad and inconsistent the film is. 1 minute, we have a serious scene with a young girl having her head cut off and facing death with dignity, or the Tsar talking about how he wants to be a strong ruler, and then that can be juxtaposed with a scene of Napoleon falling asleep, or cringely chatting up Josephine, falling down the stairs, and then getting tips from his wife's former lover. The whole structure, focusing the film on Josephine and neglecting Napoleon's martial prowess, ruined the film. Salvaging this film in the director's cut would be like salvaging the RMS Titanic and putting her back into service. She would undoubtedly break up before you even got her to the surface. Will we ever get a decent Napoleon series or film? The pessimist in me says no. I am aware Spielberg announced he was doing a series for HBO, but he also announced this over 10 years ago, and nothing has happened, so I suspect this will also go nowhere. Still, I'm sure perhaps a century from now, someone might be brave enough to actually read a history book and adapt something, but we might be stuck with a Mr. Scott outing until then. In the meantime, this has been The Laughing Cavalier, wishing you a good day.
勝利は確実です。最後まで手綱を緩めるな。まだ何が起こるかわからない。あの艦隊にあの男がいるとしたらな。ヤン・ウェンリー准将。ああ、その通りだ。
だがそう言いながらも、その後上将の英雄と呼ばれたラインハルトはほとんど勝利を確信していた。